just like music. There's something else you can't see with your eyes. Something lives deep inside you. Something whose morning injections take away.
But I thought the injections are for our health.
No, they remove something.
What?
So that's what I want to talk about today. The injections take something away. And I'm not just talking about the COVID vaccine, what they're calling a vaccine injection schedule. I'm talking about the entire injection schedule that we were born into. We've been lied to. Our children are now enrolled in an injection program, a schedule of injections. We're worried about boosters. Oh, they want 5 shots now or 6. Oh, they planned on 8 doses of this. Like, that's a scandal. When our children are on a schedule of 49 doses by the time they're in kindergarten, by the time they're 6 years old. That clip that I started this podcast with is from the old movie called The Giver, where this entire society were raised under revisionist history. All of the books had been censored and all of the truth had been censored. Sound familiar? And they were required to take injections constantly. So the movie starts out in a sort of black and white tone. And then as the boy stops taking the injections, the film starts to be seen in color. And he can start to perceive frequencies that he had been cut off from by the injections, the very injections that he had been told his whole life were to keep him healthy. So he fakes the injection and uses an apple when he's leaving the house because they make it so easy, right? Like, they're going to give us a patch. It's just like a Band-Aid. You just put it right on and you got the microneedles. You won't even feel it. Well, they made it super easy for them in the movie as well. So he quits taking the injections by tricking the AI computer system into thinking that he has been taking them. And then he tries to convince his friends also to stop taking the injections so that the veil can be removed from their eyes as well. So the lens that they see the world through can be cleaned.
Creating a new society, one of true equality. Rules were the building blocks of that equality. We learned them as new children. Rules like, take your morning medication. Inject it.
I apologize, but I'm late.
Your apology is accepted.
Goodbye, Mother.
Did it work? I don't know how long it takes for the injections to leave you, whether a day was long enough.
Why did I do this, Jonas? On the walk here, I was thinking of how I would scold you, how I would say, oh, it's fine for you to break the rules because you're chosen.
Do you feel anything?
It feels
Fiona, what do you feel?
I don't know. I don't have the words to describe it.
No, I'm on night shift. I don't feel right, Jonas. I need to go and get my injection. I need to go to work.
Fiona, there is more. So much more.
Sorry for the mushy scene for anyone who thought that might have been too cheesy or cringeworthy, but the point I wanted to make is that there's more. There's so much more. And I would venture to say that the majority of the population cannot see. They are not awake yet. And I believe there is a reason for that, a scientific reason for that, that's not just social engineering, but genetic engineering. So I want to start out with a clip from an old video that I put up, 4, 5, 6 years ago, from a scientific seminar talking about how at that time 8% of the human genome had already been replaced with these CRISPR-Cas9 genetic codes, these sequences that are carried by viruses. And of course, when I say viruses, I mean nanobots. For anyone who's new to this channel or the thesis that we've been discussing for years on this channel, when we say the word virus, We are actually talking about this subset of delivery mechanisms that are nanotechnologies. Some just outright nanobots, others that might be almost biologically indistinguishable, like the parasitic soft-bodied nanotechnologies that we've shown the patents for in the past several videos, or the liquid computing that was talked about and achieved by Charles Lieber, who was arrested, the Harvard scientist that was arrested at the beginning of COVID-19, and he had chemically welded on, basically computer components onto this lipid nanoparticle technology that has become now world famous with these COVID-19 injections. So they've told everybody that it's just the lipid nanoparticle that should have just stayed in the deltoid muscle. It should have just encapsulated the partial code for that protein, and when they injected it in the deltoid, it should have just stayed there, right there in the deltoid, and the body mounted the immune response. So they're saying, oh, we don't know why. It's a total mystery why it shot off like a rocket, like a heat-seeking missile, and went straight toward the reproductive areas, towards the ovaries, toward the bone marrow where the blood is made. We don't know why that happened. It's a mystery. But the technology exists that it is a smart virus. It is a smart nanoparticle that can be programmed to target whatever cells or organs or whatever, which now we can see the data backs up that that is what they're injecting. Allegedly, in my humble opinion. For new viewers, I just wanted to preface all of this information with that, so that they know when we use that word virus, we're not talking about what the mainstream is, the paradigm that they have taught us. But we will use that term virus interchangeably with these nanotechnologies. But that doesn't mean that we believe that these are just snippets of DNA floating around left over from evolution that just infect people and try to take over their host bodies. No, we believe that this is an ancient, systemic genetic engineering program against the human race that has been layered into us generation upon generation, wave upon wave, and that many of these genetic changes, these CRISPR-Cas9 genetic snippets, are inserted at the germ level, which means if we are infected with them, our children will then be born, and all subsequent generations afterwards will be born with that genetic augmentation. Like the Bible calls it, original sin. It says that the original contamination of the human gene pool was passed on to every generation of humans afterward. Okay, so I guess we should just start at the foundation as we begin to build this line of thought. Here's the first clip.
There are a lot of these viruses in your genome. Scientists have identified about 100,000 elements in your genome that came from viruses. Now, to put that in perspective, we all have 20,000 protein coding genes. That takes up about 1.2% of our genome. Viruses, these things take up about 8 or 9%. So we're dealing with a time scale that we carry in our own bodies that is really, you start to get into unimaginably old periods of time. I mean, I've just marked an era where the Grand Canyon formed. And you have viruses that are older than that in your own genome. This is a deeply weird concept. I mean, that to think of our human genome having been gradually eroded, like the Grand Canyon, for millions of years by viruses. Now, our genomes didn't, go willingly. We actually have lots of genes that seem to be specifically adapted for fighting off these viruses as they try to enter the genome and then as they try to replicate. We try to put a stop to this because it can be very disruptive. I mean, if a virus plops in and happens to plug itself where there's a really essential gene, there can be trouble. A lot of retroviruses are associated with cancer.
Okay, now let's talk about some of the genetic modifications and genes that can be inserted into us, and I believe absolutely have already been inserted into us, and we are in the process of more layers of this technology. So I'm going to talk about optogenetics and epigenetics next. Now, as I go through this, I'm going to use some clips that I have used in the past. Please stay with me, even if you've seen my past videos, because I want to put all of these clips spanning the last, 5 to 8 years together right now in context as we go down this avenue of thought. That what if, just like that movie, The Giver, we were born into a lifetime injection program? That the things that we have seen in these vials and under the microscope and in the blood tests and all of that we've been talking about from these COVID injections, what if that is just the tip of the iceberg? That it's not the beginning of this transhumanist thing, this human experimentation that in World War II the Nazis called the Uberman, and all of the other nations have done it as well. We know China and Russia all experimented with chimeras and super soldiers and all of this, Manchurian Candidate, mind control, all of these different things. So that's what I'm going to attempt to lay out the case for in this video, is now take all of these individual things that we talked about over the course of the last decade or so, and the science has been out long before that, and put all of those puzzle pieces here together in one video in context to hopefully, if not prove, at least provide food for thought for the scientific community. Like here on the screen is just up to 15 months old. Just a 1.5-year-old baby. All of these injections, we're like, oh, why do we need 4 boosters for COVID or 5 boosters? Well, look at what our children go through when they're only like a year old. Look how many doses of each one they're getting. And a newborn baby, cannot even mount an immune response. It would be like asking a baby to start their period and go through puberty. They simply don't have the chemical production in their body at that time, the hormone production and the chemicals needed to have a menstrual cycle. Well, that's an analogy to what is going on with newborn vaccination. It makes absolutely no scientific sense that they would be giving vaccines the moment that a child is born, whisking them away and giving them their first dose of these injections. And this just shows, starting with hepatitis at birth, but we know that they want the COVID injections now, so this has been added too. There are far more injections than just what's here on the screen. So I think it's suspicious that that's exactly how gene therapy works. It has to be done in multiple doses. It is a series, it's a schedule of injections. One of the genetic engineering techniques that they use to turn off and on our cells and thereby control our nervous system, our nerves, and our brains and our behavior is optogenetics. It's all based on taking the genetic code from algae that reacts to light and then putting that genetic code into mammals. And this is part of the changeover from Wi-Fi to Li-Fi. So right now we have our Wi-Fi routers that beam this, and then all of our devices in the general vicinity pick it up. But they're changing us over into all LED light bulbs, green legislation, right, to keep us from using incandescent light bulbs and force us all to change over to the LED light bulbs. Now, special LED light bulbs are designed to be the new Wi-Fi system, only it's Li-Fi. So all of the lighting fixtures in your house, this is the smart city diagram, right? This is the new sustainable smart city. So all of the LED bulbs would then be the Li-Fi system. Then all of the devices within the reach of those light frequencies would be the new Wi-Fi, the Li-Fi, which links all those devices into the Internet of Things. And here's a diagram from 2016. So, we're talking, 6 years ago, where they were showing them in streetlights. The Li-Fi LED streetlights that everyone has seen being put in. People seem to be extremely concerned about 5G, but 5G is really just the thing that they need for speed. They have to be able to transmit incredible amounts of information quickly. And so they need the 5G, 6G, that type of infrastructure up, whether it's safe or not. And yes, of course, it can be weaponized. We get all of that. But it's one piece of the puzzle. It's not the entire puzzle. The other piece is this LED. They need the light frequencies over all the smart devices. And when I say all of the devices, I mean you and me, all of the people. They want to turn all of us into these devices. That's the technology that I want to show you right now. The genetic engineering programs that they are using to connect humans into the Internet of Things. This bio and technology together. It's not a coincidence that a computer programmer, like Bill Gates from one of the largest computer corporations like Microsoft, is the one that just happens to be spearheading this injection schedule, and the one who is financing the World Health Organization to, exercise control. Because this is a Microsoft project. This is a computer project. And this virus is a computer virus. And just like the evil hackers design these viruses to infect computer after computer after computer, one to another, that's the same thing these mad scientists have done. And all of this talk about shedding is very real. I mean, here on the screen, there's millions of articles about scientists developing quote-unquote contagious vaccines that spread so that they don't have to convince the entire population or forcibly inject the entire population, because the ones that they do inject become bioweapons, and their cells start making the bioweapon and transferring it through the oils in their skin, their respiratory droplets, all of that type of thing. So for people that say that, there's no evidence that viruses are contagious, well, I might actually agree with you. But vaccines are contagious. They've lied to us. We've been lied to our entire life. These symptoms that we see that they're telling us are diseases that just miraculously all look the same, right? The West Nile rash looks just like the yellow fever rash, looks just like the measles rash, there's a reason for that. Because those aren't diseases. Those are symptoms. And the contagion isn't the virus. The contagion is the vaccine. And if that sounds completely crazy, that none of this illness that we've seen in our lifetime has been from viruses, it has all been from this gene therapy injection program, these contagious vaccines, then please just stick around and let me show you some more of this evidence. Which brings us back to this little light-sensitive algae and the importance of the little snippet of genetic code that they took from this organism and genetically engineered into mammals.
Scientists can switch on cells in this mouse's brain simply by switching on a light. The light activates nerve cells, which make the animal walk in circles. This neat trick is also a powerful new tool. Using light to control the behaviour of cells is teaching us about everything from how we wake up to how we learn. This is optogenetics. It all started with algae. In 2002, researchers discovered that a protein that causes green algae to swim towards or away from light is a light-sensitive channel. Blue light causes the channel to open, and positive ions then flood into the cell, much like the influx of ions that cause nerve cells to fire. Neuroscientists were quick to see the potential of these algal proteins. They realised that if they could get proteins called channel rhodopsins to work in mammalian nerve cells, they'd have a very precise way of controlling nerve activity in the brain. For many applications, this method would be better than drugs, which act too slowly, and better than electrical stimulation of the brain, which is less precise. Getting an algal protein into, for example, a mouse brain requires a bit of genetic engineering. First, you take the gene that encodes the protein, plus another piece of DNA called a promoter, and you put them in a virus. When the virus is injected into the mouse's brain, it infects neurons and delivers the gene. A chosen subset of those neurons will have the right machinery to activate the promoter, and in those cells the algal protein is expressed in the cell membrane. To activate the protein, all you need is light, and channel rhodopsins are not the only proteins in the optogenetics toolkit. In this fly, a different light-sensitive system is used to target just 2 out of 200,000 neurons. These neurons govern an escape response, the reflex that makes the fly flee as you move in to swat it. Here, a flash of light activates the neurons, making the fly jump and spread its wings. It can't take off because it's trapped in a petri dish. As well as activating neurons with light, scientists wanted to be able to silence them. Switching neurons off is just a case of using a different light-sensitive protein, such as halorhodopsin, and a different colour of light. Watch how this worm's workout is interrupted when a yellow light is switched on. The light activates halorhodopsin, triggering a flood of negative ions which inhibit the worm's motor neurons and stop it swimming. And neuroscientists aren't the only ones using optogenetics. As well as turning neurons on or off, a diversity of tools allow researchers to control many different processes in living animals and in cells in dishes. These mouse heart cells have been engineered to beat in time to pulses of light. And here, a light-sensitive protein makes this skin cell move towards a laser. The applications are endless.
They certainly are endless. It seems like especially the one attached to heart cells, that they can just hit you with the wave, hit you with the frequency, just like it said, and bam, instant heart attack. Natural causes, they say. Oh, they just died of natural causes. Now, I myself experienced this back long before these injections, whatever it was that they gave me in 2011, and then I would get hit with these frequencies, and people say it's not true, oh, targeted individuals, it wasn't in my mind. I went to the hospital emergency room multiple times. My heart rate, they hit me once, my heart rate shot up to 280 beats a minute. And they kept telling me, well, it must be a panic attack. I'm like, I don't have any anxiety. No, something is hitting me like an electrical shock. And, it seems like everybody I know now has some sort of heart arrhythmia. Either their heart will get hit and slow down, or their heart will get hit and they'll have these bouts of a really fast heartbeat. But, mine would get hit and it would beat so fast, just suddenly out of nowhere, that I would pass out. I would start to, black out from it. And finally, when I was at the hospital, there was a world-renowned doctor there volunteering, because we got a crappy little hospital here. No offense to, it's better now, but back then it was bad news to go to that hospital. And there happened to be a heart specialist on duty when I went in the middle of the night. And he came in and he's like, oh yeah, I know how to solve this. It's SVT. And so he scheduled me for the heart surgery, and they did the ablation and burned out a couple of circuits, stimulated until they found the one that was being stimulated that was causing it. And once they isolated it, a couple of them actually, they burned those circuits in my heart out. And I've been fine ever since, and that was like a decade ago. So it wasn't a panic attack at all. Thank God that there was finally somebody there who could think outside the box and go, oh yeah, this is a real problem. An electrical circuit problem. And the thing is, way back then, they were just developing the technology to be able to go in and do this and burn those circuits out and isolate them and all of that. And now it's commonplace. You can go in and get an ablation all over the place. And now everybody's getting them because everybody needs them. Why is that? Especially in their 20s. I was shocked after my surgery that I started hearing about so many kids in their 20s that were having all these heart arrhythmias. And I believe that it's this technology, whether it's being accidentally triggered by people just laying around with their cell phone on their chest, playing their cell phone games or scrolling through TikTok or something, whether it's collateral damage in that way or whether it's part of the purposeful culling. I don't know, but I do believe it can be attributed to this technology, this genetic modification that they have put into us.
In 2004, two separate groups of neuroscientists were able to use viruses to insert the channelrhodopsin gene into neurons. Since channelrhodopsin can be activated by shining a light on it, when it's expressed in neurons, shining a light on those neurons opens up the channels, generating an action potential. Scientists have been able to create mice that naturally express the protein in their neurons to focus their light beam on specific structures or cell types. When they turn on the light, they essentially turn on the neurons exposed to the light. This lets scientists examine how turning those cells on and off affect a lot of different things, including controlling the behavior of an awake animal. And because light is so easy to turn on and off, optogenetics allows very precise control of neuronal activation, like in the realm of milliseconds. Because optogenetics only requires a single gene to create the protein, scientists can target specific types of neurons to make them express channelrhodopsin, letting them pick apart the roles of different cells in the brain. Even more recently, researchers have started using new light-sensitive proteins to influence neuronal signaling. Some of them open and close at different rates, affecting the speed of the neuron's signal. And some of them can actually suppress action potentials, letting scientists effectively turn off particular neurons within a circuit.
Okay, so that's a condensed version of what is going on with that particular genetic augmentation. If you want more information on that, please go over to my website, and the second row down right here, the COVID virus and computer virus are the same thing: bioweapons, biohacking, DNA, smart viruses, neural implants, optogenetics. This one right here, the blue thumbnail. That is 4 hours and 55 minutes of information on this topic right here that we just condensed in about 3 or 4 minutes. And then if you go about halfway down the page, you'll hit another section that has this little text area that says answering the tough questions and tackling the controversial topics, blah, blah, blah. In the bottom row of that, on the right-hand side, this one, the Sun Simulator video. The Sun Simulator, New World Order, quote, Sun God, and the AI Underworld, AI Smart Cities Agenda 2021 to 2030. In there, we go even further. We talk about the Sun Simulator and the lens arrays and what Elon Musk is putting up, the star constellations, the Starlink satellites. So above just street lights and the lights in your home, there are higher layers above us as well. The satellites and even the Sun Simulator, believe it or not. Okay, so let's move on from optogenetics. Another way that they genetically modify us is called epigenetics. Now, by using epigenetics, they don't even need to completely snip out parts of our DNA, and they don't need to insert DNA from other organisms. They can use epigenetics just to switch off and on our genes. Even though they remain in the human genome, they do not express. Or in one person they will express and in another they will not. And this can be done, this is the scary part, talking about this all in context, it really makes my knees weak. It really does. It makes me physically nauseous, like I'm going to throw up. When I'm really deep into these conversations with the Lord, it makes me, sometimes I have to back off. I have to be like, Lord, just, it's more than I can bear. It makes me physically ill. So this isn't a joke. This isn't a conspiracy theory. They say trust the science. Well, I'm showing you the science. And I'm going to show you a clip now about epigenetics from this video down here on the left-hand side. This is closer, about 3/4 of the way down my website, under the heading The Event Horizon and the Children of God. And down here, second row, left-hand side, this video, Who Switched Off Our Brains? DNA can be turned off and on, epigenetics. Here's a clip from that video.
These two mice on the screen right now are genetically identical. These are genetically identical sisters. But clearly, you can look at them and see that different genes have been expressed. The color of their fur is different. The amount of chemicals released in their body causing obesity. Genetic markers like being prone to heart disease, being prone to diabetes, these types of things. This is proven. These mice are genetically identical, yet different genes have been switched off and switched on by epigenetics.
So you have two mice, I call these the agouti sisters. So from the hot Dutch study and the Chinese famine studies, so the only difference between the brown mouse and the yellow mouse on this slide is what the mother was exposed to when they were in utero. These are genetically identical mice. The mother on the left, the yellow mouse, that mother was just eating normal mouse chow. The mother on the left was eating mouse chow that was supplemented with things like folic acid, choline, etc. Why those compounds? Because they're the ones that provide the methyl groups that are placed down onto the DNA. All those methyl groups that are needed for programming come in from our diet. So that's why this early time point is so important. And what we showed is in this system anyway, that molecular mechanism that relates these two time points together is DNA methylation at a region that's upstream of the agouti mouse. So for the first time we showed that small changes in nutrition can alter disease susceptibility, not through alterations in the genome, but by alterations in the epigenome. And this is fundamental.
They are two identical twin sisters from the same mother. So what makes them look so different? Well, it turns out that there's a second genome called the epigenome. Epigenome literally means in addition to or above the genome. And while the recently completed Human Genome Project identified approximately 25,000 genes, these genes still need instructions for what to do and when to do it and where to do it. And that's where the epigenome comes into play. A useful analogy is to think of the epigenome as the software that directs the genomic hardware of a computer. All of our cells contain the same DNA and genes, but it is the epigenome that decides how these genes are expressed and determines how a cell becomes a heart cell, a liver cell, or even a hair cell. Epigenetics consists of molecular switches and markers, such as DNA methylation, that help control gene regulation, in which a quartet of atoms, called a methyl group, attaches to DNA and shuts down genes. And as you can see, the red balls here are attaching to the DNA and turning off the gene. So back to the agouti sisters. In the yellow obese mouse, the agouti gene is unmethylated and turned on all the time, while in the brown mouse, the gene is completely methylated and shut down. There are also other mice that appear mottled, in which half of the cells are methylated and shut down, and the other half are unmethylated and turned on, and these mice appear to be yellow and brown. So the co-colors of these agouti mice acts like a sensor for the amount of DNA methylation present. And we also saw that maternal exposure to this chemical decreased DNA methylation in the offspring and turned this agouti gene on when it is supposed to be off. So we started a second study in which pregnant mothers were exposed to BPA plus nutritional supplementation such as methyl donors like folic acid or genistein, which is a common ingredient found in soy products. And once we did this, we observed that the offspring were no longer predominantly yellow and more obese, and that there were more offspring with the slender brown coat color phenotype. This indicates that maternal nutrient supplementation can counteract the negative effects of exposure to that chemical.
Now that form of genetic engineering is especially terrifying because they can do it through the food supply and through just basic supplements. Like all of the pills they give pregnant women now. Oh no, you need to take your pill every single day for the whole 9 months that you're pregnant. And then that's what they're saying. It was what the mother ate affected the offspring. And you know, we've talked about the dangers of no long-term studies on these injections because a lot of things that are showing up a generation later can be attributed to something that the mother did. But Big Pharma uses that as a cover-up. They're like, oh, well, you know, that person didn't take any of this medication. Well, they didn't have to. The mother did it, and that changed the next generation. Take thalidomide, for example. You know, now it's one of the biggest pharmaceutical scandals ever. But it was marketed over the counter. Right here, it says when it was first released, it was promoted for anxiety and trouble sleeping and morning sickness. They targeted pregnant women with this chemical. And women took it for morning sickness for years. It wasn't removed from the market until 1961. So 4 years women took this, and they were told right here it was initially thought to be safe and effective in pregnancy. Well, where have we heard that before?
At all-time lows when television personalities started to outright lie to get people to trust in it.
Now we know that the vaccines work well enough that the virus stops with every vaccinated person. A vaccinated person gets exposed to the virus does not infect them. The virus cannot then use that person to go anywhere else.
Now that's not true.
Pregnant women who were known to be pregnant were excluded from the clinical trials, but we now know they've been used in pregnant women, and we know that pregnant women are more likely to have more severe illness with COVID. The answer is yes, they're safe and they're effective, and it's best to be protected.
There is a lot of confusion after the World Health Organization recommended pregnant women hold off on getting vaccinated.
It's kind of astonishing, actually. You know, many PhD theses in psychology will be written about this in the coming years, I'm sure.
Syncytin-1, which is a protein which is present in the placenta, is also potentially attacked by your own immune system if you create these spike proteins. All these spontaneous abortions or miscarriages are coming from that.
In the Waterloo area, 86 stillbirths have occurred from January to July, and normally it's roughly one stillbirth every 2 months. But here's the kicker. Mothers of stillbirth babies were fully vaccinated, and you have clearly said on numerous occasions that the vaccines are safe. So, Minister, what do you say to the doctors who told expecting women it was okay to get fully vaccinated, and what should they tell the mothers who deliver a stillborn baby?
We are recommending that women who are pregnant do receive the vaccine for the protection of themselves, protection of their baby as well.
How can the university of any state name you want to put in there condone vaccinating children with these experimental agents, these experimental genetic agents that have never been tried on children before? I'd like to see somebody look me in the eye and tell me how they justify that.
Based on the safety data now, I can no longer recommend it. I can't recommend it. It's past all the thresholds to being a safe product. It's not a safe product. None of them are.
So a 1-month-old baby is breastfeeding. Mother takes the second dose of the Pfizer vaccine. The baby dies at 1 month of thrombocytopenia. That alone should have caused a stoppage of this, in my opinion, because you can't just talk that one away. What happened there? I hope they're very seriously looking at that.
Are these public health officers that stupid that they could actually think this way? I don't think so. I think these are criminals, and I think they're killing people, and they know they're killing people. When they know they're killing people, that's murder. I think sociopath describes it very well. They're the people that are killing our children.
We have what's called mature minor consent here in British Columbia, and there's no limit to the age that somebody can consent for medical treatment, including immunization. So you don't need to have a parent's consent, you don't need to have a signed consent form.
Kids told they can make their own decision on this, and it could be their fatal decision. Think about that. There are now papers written by prominent scientists calling for a worldwide halt in the program.
Do you know who the greatest propagator of disinformation in the history of the world is? The U.S. government. Are you familiar with McNamara, the Pentagon Papers? Are you familiar with George W. Bush and the weapons of mass destruction? Are you familiar with Iran-Contra? I mean, think of all the debates and disputes we've had over the last 50 years in our country. We work them out by debating them. We don't work them out by the government being the arbiter. I don't want you guardrails. I want you to have nothing to do with speech. You think the American people are so stupid they need you to tell them what the truth is? You can't even admit what the truth is with the Steele dossier. I don't trust government to figure out what the truth is. Government is largely disseminating disinformation.
And doctors prescribed this in other countries, like in West Germany, it was over the counter, but in other countries, like in the United States and all over the place, all over Europe, it was available, but it was available by prescription and things like that. But listen to some of the common side effects. They include rash, dizziness, cancer tumors, blood clots, and peripheral neuropathy. Have we heard about any vaccines having those same side effects? Weird. Now, I am so sorry to show these pictures, but these are the medical results of thalidomide after the media and the doctors told everyone that it was so safe for pregnant women. The children were born without limbs, or their limbs didn't develop, or a common one was what they called the lobster claw type hand that did develop. But a lot of them just didn't have arms or legs. They were born with their intestines on the outside. And there were tens of thousands of babies born like this from the thalidomide, and probably way more, because they said that once they realized why are all the children being born so deformed, and they linked it back to the thalidomide, the mothers were so ashamed that they had been so reckless during their pregnancy to have taken this medication for a sleep aid or for morning sickness, that they had to raise their children knowing that they had done this to them. So the vast majority of the mothers would not even admit that they had taken the sleeping pills or taken the morning sickness pills, even though the horror of it falls upon the chemical companies, the pharmaceutical companies, the media, the marketing people who told them that it was safe and effective. There's no way that the mothers could have known that it interfered with the transcription, the messenger RNA. There's no way that they could have known. But still, the shame associated with the situation does interfere with the true data and the numbers. One thing I rarely hear people mention about thalidomide, though, is that it is a genetic engineering chemical. Like right here, thalidomide, or a breakdown product of thalidomide, specifically binds to these GC promoter sites, decreasing transcription of genes. So exactly like we were just talking about in epigenetics, turning off and on genes. They don't remove the gene, but they cause it not to express. So by decreasing the transcription efficiency of these genes, they essentially turned off the genes that were responsible for growing arms and legs and, multiple other things. I also want to note this commonly overlooked phrase right here, or a breakdown product of thalidomide. So this is a huge way that these chemical cartels hide. They cover up what they're really doing with the chemicals, because thalidomide may not be a genetic engineering material on its own, but as soon as you consume it, it immediately breaks down into two other chemicals, and one of those chemicals goes directly to work, binding specific sites that decrease genetic transcription. And we see that a lot in their chemicals. Take aspartame, for example, that it breaks down. Oh, it's just an innocent sweetener. That's all it is, just a sweetener. No, we'll talk about aspartame later, but suffice it to say for now that it breaks down immediately when you consume it into your body. Your body immediately breaks it down into two separate chemicals that create formic acid, which is venom. So people were experiencing, especially people who drank a lot of diet sodas and I think Kool-Aid, sugar-free Kool-Aids and stuff when it was big, they were experiencing what we're seeing with these COVID injections, paralysis, Guillain-Barré, all sorts of neurological effects from the venom. But it's just aspartame, right? Well, no, because it breaks down immediately into two chemicals, and they know that. So I have a short segment later in this video on that. But the point for right now is that this wasn't just a sleeping pill or a morning sickness pill. In fact, when they first discovered this chemical, they said, oh, it doesn't have any value. It's not anything that can help people. It's not a sleeping pill. But one of the side effects of this chemical, sort of like when you take Benadryl for allergies, it makes you sleepy. So they realized that it did make people feel sleepy. So they're like, yeah, we'll market it that way. And then they targeted pregnant women with this known genetic modification chemical. Now, throughout the years, the story's been told that it was an oversight. But I believe, and this is just my personal opinion, but I'll show you why I believe it. I believe that this was one of the beta tests. This was one of the beta tests in this genetic engineering program, and they targeted a specific group that they wanted, pregnant women. So if you check the history and manufacture of this product, and you go all the way down, let's go to right here, history. In 1952, thalidomide was synthesized by this company, but was found to, quote, have no effect on animals and was discarded on that basis. But in 1957, this seemingly useless chemical was acquired by this company. I can't pronounce that, I guess Grunenthal? Yeah, probably Grunenthal. Again, in Germany. You guys know that we have traced this thread through all of this that is going on. They're the ones, these were Dr. Mengele-styled experiments on these pregnant women with thalidomide, genetic engineering experiments. That's what they were always doing, trying to create this Uberman, superhuman, master race, genetically engineering people, and it never ended. So let's take a look at this company. Grunenthal Pharmaceutical Company. Chemie Grunenthal was founded in 1946 by Hermann Wirtz Sr., a former Nazi Party member. Okay, so this pharmaceutical company is actually founded by a Nazi Party member. Let's see who its head researchers are. Under its head researcher, Heinrich Muchter, a former Nazi scientist. So these are all Nazis. Why is nobody talking about that? That thalidomide wasn't just a morning sickness pill that went wrong, but these were Nazis who were doing genetic research against people's will. So I hate to beat a dead horse and have to keep saying it, but you never know if this is the first time somebody has stumbled across this channel. And the evidence shows that we did not win World War II. That is a cover-up. That is revisionist history, especially in the Antarctica series. We talked a lot about this. But these people, they got away, and they continued to take over the world. I mean, you have Nazis took over NASA, Nazis infiltrated the EU, Nazis infiltrated and took over NATO, Nazis infiltrated and took over the United Nations. I mean, here they are right on the screen. Look it up. And actually, to say infiltrated, that's a massive understatement because they were essentially the founders of most of these organizations. The United Nations was set up by these people for world government. Likewise, Wernher von Braun was essentially a founding member of NASA, like they created NASA. Nazis went into South America, all through Brazil and Argentina, and all of these nations now that have been plundered. Like I said in my book 20 years ago, that the Nazis in our country, in the United States, they're not these skinheads in the hills of Idaho. The Nazis in our country, they're in the skyscrapers in New York City. They're in the White House, or the movie studio they're telling us is the White House right now. Whatever. These people are allies with the Nazis in Ukraine. I mean, surely you can see from Ukraine that World War II never even ended. It's still going on. Russia and the Nazis, the Soviet Union and the Nazis were allies. They were buddies in World War II when they launched the takeover. And the Nazis betrayed Russia. So that battle's still going on. That's what's going on in the Ukraine. They're still bickering about who owns that territory. Are the Nazis going to run the Ukraine, or is the Soviet Union, are the Russians going to take it back? I mean, it's kind of clear which side our current regime is on. They seem to be working with the Nazis in Ukraine. And they're also working with the Nazis in the United Nations and the Nazis in NATO. So, but for me, does that make one better than the other? Do I think the communists are heroes because they're fighting the Nazis to get Soviet Union territory back still? No, neither one of them are my hero. Neither one of them. I came out of Babylon. I don't have a horse in this race. Like I always say, God's going to handle that. They are going to bring it upon themselves. They're going to make this war. They're going to kill each other. And our only job is to come out of Babylon. We can't be reliant on their system. They're forcing us out of their system anyway. But yeah, we just need to come out of Babylon and build our parallel society, which is what we're trying to do. You guys know with the outreach here in the central city that I showed, is get ready for this because it's coming. And yes, we all know there's tons of fake footage and tons of staged events and staged photographs and all of that in the coverage. There always is in every single war, in every single hurricane, and we see this throughout. The mainstream news is junk. It's garbage. And we understand that there are handshake deals behind the closed doors that, everybody thinks people are enemies and they're actually friends, and there's double crosses and double agents and spies who spend decades infiltrating a regime so they appear as someone's friend and they're really not their friend, and that there's mafia wars and all of that. The Bible is clear that at the very end, some of these very end-time kings, the 10 horns, that some of them will be displaced, will be overthrown by others in the beast system. So who that is and how that's going to play out, I don't know. I don't think they even know. It's so compartmentalized that some of these leaders think that their closest advisors are their closest advisors, when in fact, it's their worst enemy that has embedded themselves and giving them terrible advice. A lot of people think that's what happened to Trump, that his advisors betrayed him. Whether it's real to those leaders of those nations or not, it's real to these people. It's real to the people who are living in the areas that they are doing these war games. It's real to the people who are displaced from their homes in every nation. This happens in every nation. You're not going to tell me that there wasn't a slaughter in Rwanda. You're not going to tell me that people didn't die in Afghanistan. So as their script plays out on the world stage, it might not be real to them, but it's going to be real to us. But if you're counting on Vladimir Putin being your savior, or Joe Biden or any politician, I'm telling you right now, I have to warn you in the name of the Lord Jesus Christ, they are not going to save you. You cannot solve a spiritual problem with a political solution. This nation is under judgment because we have turned our back on God. I mean, come on, we just came out of Pride Month, all right? You guys know what's going on in this country. It's going to hell in a handbasket, and we are under judgment. The world is under judgment. And this thing that we are fighting, this entity in Antarctica, this world government, its roots are spiritual. This is a spiritual battle. If you think you're going to defeat a spirit by voting for this politician or that politician, or sending all of your money to these multi-millionaires, multi-billionaires campaigns, you're wrestling the wind. Look, we have people who have gone into government, and God bless them. Marjorie Taylor Greene, love her. I would hug her. I wish I could see her. I'd put my arms around her and give her a big old hug and kiss. I love her. She's my sister. Rand Paul, he's a great debater. He's a smart man. I use his clips all the time. I love the way he articulates things. He makes the point. Who's that other lawyer? Ted Cruz, great lawyer, silver-tongued. I love the way he says things. He can drive the point home. I use his clips all the time. But the point is, it doesn't change anything. It hasn't changed anything. My whole life, half a century now, we sit and we listen to the same rhetoric, and I appreciate it because it does help wake people up. But we never get to the root of the problem. We just never do. Instead of focusing on who our real enemy is, who's really running the world, down here at the roots, we're up here snipping leaves off. We're like, oh, if we snip this leaf off, then the whole tree is going to die. Or look, we pulled all of our resources and everything the Lord gave us so we could cut this one branch off. Now the tree's going to die. It's like, no, it just keeps growing back in the earth and growing back and growing back. Because our battle is not up here. Our battle is here. Remember who you are. Remember why we are here. We are servants and children of the Most High Holy God. We're not tree trimmers. We're here to lay the axe to the root. This is a spiritual war. So it's really sad to me, especially since we're trying to do the Lord's work and build this parallel society outside of Babylon. And, you know, out of 20 million viewers or whatever that I've had over the last few years, I've got like a core of 200 believers that will help us do the Lord's work and prepare, you know, to be the body of Christ, the shining light in this darkness that's coming. Instead, all the rest of them are giving all their money and the resources the Lord gave them to these politicians and these millionaires and billionaires because they think there's going to be a political solution to this thing. And there's not. There is no political solution to a spiritual problem. What we need is a revival. I mean, let's just be frank. Let's be honest here. I know that some people don't want to hear this. They just want me to tickle their ears and say that the way to make America great again is, politicians, through politicians. We need more politicians. But then I have to ask you, how is that going to get us out of this impending civil war? If we were to elect the most holy people on earth that had our best interest at heart, and you knew it for sure, they weren't even politicians, they were the most holy people on the earth, they would still riot. This regime has weaponized their people. They have taken them over as mental slaves. So if we do have an awesome election year, we're still going to have a civil war. If we don't, and they still rig all the elections and put their people in, we're still going to have a war. Say righteous people did win, then what? Are you going to fill the entire landscape with prisons so that we can round up all these looters who are going to get their $900 worth of free merchandise, who won't work for a living and establish a safe, peaceful neighborhood other than trying to create a place where everybody can live together in peace and not even have to lock their doors? A true, peaceful, great America? I mean, you think they're going to do that? Or are you going to fill the landscape with prisons and put all these people in cages so, some of us might be able to unlock our doors again like it was when I was a kid? How are you going to do this? How are you going to bring God back to America politically? Are you going to make sodomy illegal? Is that it? You think that some politician's going to stand up and say, no, Sodom and Gomorrah is wrong and this is illegal. You can't enforce morality through legislation, through laws from the outside in, forcing people from the outside in. God writes his moral laws on our hearts. He cleanses us from the inside out. The dead can't see. They can't. They do not have eyes to see or ears to hear. The solution is resurrection. That's the only solution. Revival. To be revived means to come back to life, to bring the dead back to life. And to do that, they need to be filled with the Holy Spirit, to be born again. That's the mission. So I get the question a lot. This is so overwhelming. They're so thorough, this cabal. They have really taken over everything. They've got us in checkmate. If we resist, then they round us up and they say we're inciting. It's incitement and they throw us in jail. Or if we try to take it back by force, then it's insurrection and they throw us in jail. And if we do nothing, then they just go on with their plan, which is still to genocide us and kill us and destroy this nation. So, they've got us in checkmate. What do? What's the solution? It's all problems and no solution. Well, here's the solution. 2 Chronicles 7:14. God gave us the solution. If my people, which are called by my name, shall humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways. That's an important part, right? Everybody wants to pray, but they don't want to turn from their wicked ways. If God's people will turn from their wicked ways and stand for God again, if my people, which are called by my name, shall humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways, then will I hear from heaven and will forgive their sin and will heal their land. We don't need more lawyers or more politicians. We need to hit our knees and turn from our wicked ways. We need to come together. We're not building the kingdom of Babylon anymore. We did that. It did not work out well. We're building the kingdom of heaven now. The prophecy of Daniel in Daniel 2:44 and 45 says that when Babylon falls, we are not to be wasting our precious life energy, our life force, building scaffolding, trying to save it, build back better. That's not us. In that time when Babylon falls, he's going to establish his kingdom, which is eternal. Again, Daniel 2:44, and in the days of those kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom that will never be brought to ruin, and the kingdom itself will not be passed on to any other people. It will crush and finally put an end to all of these kingdoms, and it itself will stand for eternity. Those who have come out, we come together now. The nurses, the doctors who have lost their jobs because they wouldn't take the injections, they're coming together as a network. Frontline doctors, right? People are networking. Farmers, truckers, they're coming out. We don't need Babylon. We built this nation. We did it. We stocked those shelves. We stood at those cash registers. We drove those trucks. We grew those crops. We learned the skills. We learned how to be plumbers and electricians, and we laid those railroads. We did that. All they did is step in and try to put the reins on us. They just stepped in and tried to drain off all of our prosperity, everything that we built. That's their currency, is our electrical current, our life force. That's why their words are the same. That's where they get it. The Bible says they trade in the souls of men. They're parasites. And it's time for us to shake this parasite off our back, draining us of all of our income through all these taxes and all this. No, you're not going to be able to reform this. It's too far gone. We don't need their Babylon. Let it fall. Come out. We can do the same thing for ourselves. And if they come for us, when they come for us, we'll cross that bridge when it comes. And I guarantee you, they're not going to want to come across that bridge. Because while they are a people who stand for nothing, who have no principles, just greed, seeking whatever they can get their grubby little hands on, that's not how we are. We stand for what we believe, and we are not afraid to die for what we believe, because we're not atheists. We know where we came from, and we'll be happy to go home when we finish our mission here. So when God says to walk in the Spirit instead of carnally, I take him seriously. I don't want to preserve Babylon. I don't want to rule over Babylon. I don't want to be a government leader in Babylon's government. I don't want anything to do with Babylon. I want Babylon to fall. I want to be a servant in the kingdom of heaven, which is a whole different thing. I don't know why anybody has their hope in this system. Babylon is falling. If you want to put all the resources that the Lord has blessed you with into an institution that is falling, I would beg you not to. Please come. Help the body of Christ build the parallel society, because we're the ones who are out here networking. Right here, I'm networking with the farmers, big farmers, farmers who have 3,000 acres, small farmers who have, a dozen head of cattle, and they keep chickens, and they, grow sweet corn and all of that. We're networking. We have the Amish and the Mennonites literally 2-3 miles from where I'm sitting in this chair right now. We're networking to prepare and provide for the people. I mean, if you think that you're going to beat this entity that we are fighting by electing a certain politician or something, you're wrestling the wind. You're simply wrestling the wind. This is a spirit, like we talked about as above, so below video. The roots of this thing are in the spiritual realm. We got to cut this thing down by the roots We got to dig up those roots and get rid of this son of a bitch once and for all. And no politician is going to do that. Only Jesus Christ is going to do that. So we need to be uniting in that kingdom. The kingdom of heaven is at hand. Join it. And don't get me wrong, if God has called you to run for office, especially locally, I completely understand that strategy to take over your local community. Absolutely, especially school boards, and I get all of that. And of course, you need to do what God called you to do. He calls each of us to do something different. You know, some people, like me, he'll tell specifically, I need you to stock up, you know, like Joseph for the famine. I need you to do this, 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 and this. So I may be stocking up, and then you'll hear another brother or sister in another region say, God told me not to stock up, just to trust him, that he'll provide for me on the way. Well, that's probably because some regions are going to be battlefields and other regions are going to be safe havens. So you may not need to stock up because you're just going to have to grab your duffel bag and hit the bricks. But I do need to stock up because I'll be here waiting for you when you get here at the safe haven. So just because God tells each of us to do something different doesn't mean either of us are wrong. So you do what God has called you to do. I'm just saying that the same thing I've said all these years when I shared my dreams and visions, that from day one, God had shown me that we were on our own. At that point, when it hit the fan, there was no government. There were no police. You weren't even going to call 911 and, like now with the police shortages and stuff, and get an answering machine. The police had all gone home to their families. There was nothing they could do. They went home to their families, and we were living as communities. There was no government. I mean, I'm not saying there wasn't, like, in a bunker somewhere. I mean, I'm sure all of the rich politicians are on a list, and they get to go down in a bunker somewhere. Or we could have a few years. You know, I've planned for both contingencies. I don't know, I don't have a date. But I have heard lots of other dreams and visions about an interim period where states are seceding from the Union. The country's kind of broken up into almost like two countries, and then the UN comes in, and that's sort of the invasion phase, and people are being rounded up from FEMA regions and taken on trucks from one region to another and all sorts of stuff. So there may be years in between that you need to be standing your post. We can use allies everywhere. That's during World War II. A lot of the people who worked in government, they gave extra chits, extra packets of the food stamp-like chits so that people who were hiding, refugees, could get food for them and stuff like that. So, you know, if God's called you to be in a government office, you do what God told you to do. I'm with you. I support you 100%. I believe that you have a personal relationship with Jesus Christ. And you're perfectly capable of having that relationship on your own without me getting in the middle of it. And if you don't have a relationship with Jesus Christ, please, there's a link down below in the description box and might give you a little guidance in, approaching him and asking him to forgive your sins and come in and take charge of your life so that you do have refuge in the Most High, in the Holy Spirit. He's the one who's going to be taking care of us through this. But I do want to mention, even if you are going into the school systems and the school boards and all of that, you know, kudos to you. But what I've seen was the schools were closed. There were no more schools. Everything was closed. And I did see some last days of the school, and yeah, some of these kids they looked like zombies, to tell you the truth. I mean, it wasn't like they were decaying flesh hanging off, but they were like a strange color, like a grayish, like beyond pale. They were actually like gray looking, and they weren't there in their eyes, some of them. And the schools didn't have food. It was like during the famine, the schools didn't have food to feed the children. And it was more like some of the schools had been taken over, and some of the other small rural schools had been transformed into also sort of refugee places where families could come and get a little bit of food or, you know, something like that. But, you know, God told me to take my son out of school, out of public school and homeschool because of these FEMA provisions that are coming, that they actually have a bus system in place for the schools. So if somebody has an infection at the school, just like they lock the schools down now for an active shooter, that the contact tracing, they will lock the school down and take the children away from their parents. Because if the children were exposed to whatever this is, the second wave that's coming, the new pandemic, they have planned, whatever it is, when the children, if a child in the school was exposed to it or brought it in, then they locked the school down like an active shooter, and they put the children on these buses and they took them off to the quarantine camps, and their parents were not allowed there. So that's a dangerous situation. You know, there's some things you can fix as a school board member, and there are some things you can't. And my son's not going to get locked down in that situation. He's not going to get bussed away. He's not going to get injected at school without my permission, like is happening all over the world. People are reporting. I mean, over in Europe, that's their rule. One of their rules is you don't need parental consent if you're 12 years old or older. If you live in an area that you think you'll be able to keep your children in the public school system and trust them not to put them on a lockdown or on a bus somewhere or inject them against your will, you know, that's between you and God. And I'm sure God has placed tons of people, teachers and board members and principals and bus drivers and stuff all over in the school system to protect the children when these things happen. So if God's called you to do it, do it. Do what God tells you to do. But I know what the Lord told me to do, and that's this, to build this, because things aren't going to go back to normal. But we as a nation, we as the body of Christ, we have great days ahead of us. Great days. We're going to shine. I mean, it's going to look like this, though. Looks like the building, the warehouse building that I showed you guys in past videos that we're trying to get ready for. This is the type of thing that God showed me to pour my entire life and resources into. Helping others, being prepared to help others in this exodus that's coming. The mass exodus from the coastlines, from the major cities, you know, from both the disasters, from the war, from the in-between stages where people are just trying to get out before the roadblocks get set up. And, you know, there's a lot coming because this is going to happen. And when it happens, there is going to be no government. There's going to be no welfare checks. When the economy crashes and everything comes down and they crash the currency to change over, it's all going to end. There's not going to be any food stamps. To get food, you're going to have to take the mark of the beast. That's going to be the new food stamps. And we need to be ready to provide an alternative to save souls, not just to save lives. We're talking about the mark of the beast. We're talking about being ready to help people avoid taking the mark of the beast. And I'm hoping there are some of you out there on the same wavelength, and you will help build this type of thing, this parallel society, instead of pouring all of your resources into a government that is destined to fall by God's hand. It's not 1776 anymore. That's past. That was a different era. This is the end of the age. And it's an entirely different kingdom. It's the kingdom of heaven. We're not rebuilding the governments of the world. Anyway, I'm ranting and I'm sorry about that. The point is that this thread runs through all of these institutions, and not just the United Nations and the World Health Organization and NATO, the military, not just that, but the scientific community. That's a Project Paperclip. We brought all these thousands of scientists over, and they went into everything, you know, not just NASA, into physics, into chemistry, into everything, and took over the scientific community. And now what do we hear constantly? Trust the science. Trust the science. What they're telling us is to trust these Nazis. And when I say Nazis, I'm not just throwing it around like you hear people on the left that are like, anybody who I disagree with, they're a Nazi. No, I'm talking about literal Nazis. These guys are historical, literal Nazis who committed genocide. Klaus Schwab's dad, Nazi. The company called Entrust, of all things, they got the European or UK contract for the vaccine passports, the digital system for contact tracing and all of that. Yeah, these multi-billionaires, one of the richest families in the world, of course, the children of Nazis, of the Nazi Gunther Quandt. How did all these Germans, I mean, is this a coincidence that all of these Germans are running the world? Who's Klaus Schwab? What makes him so special to be running the world economy, right? He's heading the World Economic Forum. Henry Kissinger. You know, we're talking, oh, was Obama born in America? Oh, what about his birth certificate? He's not even American. He wasn't even born in America. And then we got Henry Kissinger, this German, advising basically every president we've ever had for our entire lives. And we'll talk about Kissinger here in a minute. I have a large segment on NSSM 200 from December 10th of 1974. This memorandum that Kissinger wrote about population control related to what we're going through right now that started back in 1974. So all of these different chemical catastrophes that we have seen in our lifetime, you know, they've all been chalked up to, oh, that's an anomaly. Like, that's a one-time thing. And it's not. It's all part of a larger genetic engineering, human experimentation thing. It seems like it would be easy once you know the truth, but yeah, it really takes courage and mental fortitude for people to say, oh my goodness, I've been fooled. I've been on an injection schedule my entire life. Every year, the flu shot. Every year, this, it's something else. You need for your work, for your job, you got to take your hepatitis. You got to take this shot, that shot. Oh, it's all free. Just take more shots. You need more shots. Here's some shots. To realize that we were born into an injection schedule, and these people who are doing it, they're not trustworthy. These pharmaceutical companies are like this company right here, founded and run by Nazis. And talk about the food supply. Look at Monsanto and what they've been doing. Just take this one. Here's a GMO corn that's going to shake up the corn market back in 2015. Genetically engineered corn seeds that have higher yields and all that. So who did they partner with? In collaboration with German chemical giant BASF. So who's BASF? So here we go. What does BASF do? BASF founded IG Farben with Bayer, of course. Bayer. So again, why do we have all of these chemical pharmaceutical companies farming with a PH? Now Bayer is all into our crops. Everywhere you go, there's like a Bayer sign stuck into the corn crops or the soybean fields and stuff. You see them everywhere. So anyway, BASF and Bayer co-founded IG Farben. And of course, we all know that IG Farben cooperated. I like how they put that dash in there because they didn't just cooperate like getting along. No, they cooperated with the government. To assume that a national government is above the pharmaceutical companies, that's naive. No, they're operating. The pharmaceutical companies are running the world. They're running the media. They're paying off the politicians. They've taken over all the agencies. We don't have an FDA that will not approve anything that's bad for us. No, they will do what is in the best interest of these chemical and drug cartels. So anyway, IG Farben cooperated with the Nazis during World War II. And they literally built their factory inside Auschwitz so that they could profit from the slave labor inside the government concentration camps. It was the largest chemical factory in the world at that time. IG Farben became notorious through its production of the Zyklon B gas, which was the lethal gas that they used to kill the prisoners in the German extermination camps. So, genocide. That's who BASF is, right here. BASF and Bayer, BASF and Bayer, co-founders of IG Farben, that literally built their factories inside of Auschwitz so they could use the slave labor, and then they created the gas chambers so that they could commit the genocide. There's your trusted partner of Monsanto, right here. In collaboration with German chemical giant BASF, Monsanto has developed a new kind of genetically engineered corn. And for those people who think that these Nazi companies just had a casual relationship or cooperated with Monsanto on that one project to genetically engineer higher yield corn or whatever, the Monsanto company was an American agrochemical and agriculture biotechnology corporation. Then they sold out to Bayer. The Germans took it over. The deal was approved by the European Union on March 21st of 2018 and approved by the United States on May 29th of 2018. Under the terms of the merger, Bayer promised to maintain Monsanto's more than 9,000 U.S. jobs and add 3,000 new U.S. high-tech positions. So isn't that awesome that the Germans took over our food supply and added 3,000 technocracy positions to their bioengineering and genetic modification program here in the United States. Again, this company, Bayer, the same company responsible for the genocide, is now taking over our food supply, and the same Nazis who were doing the transhumanist genetic modification human experiments in the concentration camps are now in charge of the genetic engineering of our food supply, as well as our pharmaceuticals, Bayer. And they're still killing people. Remember, it was Bayer who got caught killing people here in the United States with those injections, and instead of destroying all of the contaminated injections, they sent them overseas to other countries and killed lots of other people. These are psychotic individuals.
Mike, welcome to the show. We appreciate you being on tonight.
Thanks for the invitation, Joe.
Okay, let's talk about the rat of the week. Why is Bayer Corporation the rat of the week?
Internal documents show that after this company positively, absolutely knew that they had a medication that was infected with the AIDS virus, they took the product off the market in the U.S. and then they dumped it in France, Europe, Asia, and Latin America. The medicine's called Factor VIII. It was an injection medicine that was used for hemophiliacs, mostly children. Children had been born with an incurable disease.
Hold on, Mike. So hold on. So you're telling me that Bayer knew that this drug was infected with the AIDS virus. They yanked it from the market in America, and then they dumped it in markets overseas?
They had to figure out a way, Joe, to make a profit on a product that they could not sell in America. So they made a huge profit. They dropped the product in Japan, Spain, and France. By the way, Joe, government officials in France that allowed that to happen actually had to go to prison for it. In America, not one corporate executive for this company has been indicted or even criminally investigated by our Justice Department.
Why not? You're telling me that these people that dumped this AIDS-tainted blood in foreign countries, who killed children, have not been taken to task in the United States?
It's worse than that. The U.S. government allowed it to happen. The FDA allowed this to happen. And now the government is completely looking the other way. Thousands of innocent hemophiliacs have died from the AIDS virus. And not only they're dying, their family members are dying because they're becoming infected with the disease. This company knew absolutely that they had a problem with the product. They knew that it was infected with AIDS. They dumped it because they wanted to turn this disaster into a profit.
Mike, I want to read to you what Bayer told the New York Times about this scandal. They said Bayer behaved responsibly, ethically, and humanely. Decisions made nearly 2 decades ago were based on the best scientific information of the time and were consistent with the regulations in place. That sounds like a lot of legal mumbo-jumbo. Now, you say you have internal documents that show that they knew that this drug they were dumping was tainted with the AIDS drug? Or the AIDS virus?
The documents show that there was no question that this company absolutely understood the risk, that they knew that it was contaminated. It wasn't a possibility. They knew it was contaminated. Americans were dying from the product before it was pulled off the market. The only reason it was pulled off the market is because lawyers found the documents and showed it to the government, and finally the government said, you can't sell it here, but then the government allowed them to dump it in Spain, France, and Japan.
That's amazing. That's just amazing. Well, I want to read to you what the New York Times said, and this is an investigation that they also did, and they said the federal government was part of the problem While the Food and Drug Administration told the company not to ship the drugs overseas, the man responsible for the drug supply, quote, asked that the issue be quietly solved without alerting the Congress, the medical community, and the public. This is a cover-up, and our Congress is not doing anything.
So the point I'm trying to make is that these new injections that everyone is so concerned about, this isn't the beginning of the genocide. These people are genocidal maniacs. They are psychopathic murderers who believe in enslaving humans. So this isn't an accident. Bear killing all of these people in 5 or 6 nations and getting caught is not an accident. These injections that we're taking, that they're trying to mandate on humanity right now, that are killing people, this is not an accident. That's like saying, oh, Jim Jones was a great guy, except for that one thing right at the end when he poisoned the Kool-Aid and killed everybody. Maybe he should just pay a fine like Bear did. Like, here's CBS News back in 2011. Bear admits it paid millions of dollars in HIV infection cases. But if other people commit mass murder by poisoning the food supply or poisoning Kool-Aid or whatever, oh, that's just an unbelievable murderous psychopath. And that's the point I'm making. These people who are poisoning us from the time we are born, it is not a one-time thing. I just showed you Bayer and BASF and Monsanto from their inception, from the day they were founded. They were founded in the frickin' concentration camps committing genocide. These drug cartels, from their inception, have been genocidal, murderous corporations, and they are still functioning today and convincing the masses they are trustworthy, that they're the authority, they are the science.
What you're seeing as attacks on me, quite frankly, are attacks on science. So if you are trying to, get at me as a public health official and a scientist, you're really attacking not only Dr. Anthony Fauci, you're attacking science.
This is a very, very dangerous sort of idea. The idea that a government bureaucrat represents science and that he is now untouchable, that it is sort of like you are now contradicting the all-high priest of science if you say anything. You're not to question him, just do as you're told.
Science and the truth are being attacked.
When Anthony Fauci arrogantly refers to himself as the science, he's not wrong. And this is a major problem with so-called science around the globe today. Between Anthony Fauci and Bill Gates, they control billions upon billions of dollars in grant money, and they strategically spend it to influence colleges, universities, governments, and public health globally.
Who has the ability to give billions of dollars? Who personally allocates, without congressional oversight or any kind of oversight, billions of dollars in funding to people? Anthony Fauci through the NDAID at NIH. So he's been able to set himself up as this, the kind of the spider in the web of all these different organizations. I'm sure if he tells them you have to use remdesivir and you can't talk about hydroxychloroquine, the guy that's getting 88% of his hospital funding from him says, okay, yes, sir.
It's hard to find a scientist that hasn't been influenced by their funding. And in the case of the WHO, Gates, as one of their biggest donors, has swayed their focus away from poverty alleviation, nutrition, and clean water in places like Africa towards vaccine development. Africa and India being the perfect places to test your vaccines on human guinea pigs out of the watchful eye of the EU and North America.
We're taking things that are, genetically modified organisms and we're injecting them in little kids' arms. We just shoot them right into the vein.
When you take these vaccines, get them to be very inexpensive by making big volume commitments, have that right relationship with the private sector. Our foundation is a bit more than 10 billion, but we feel there's been over a 20-to-1 return. So if you just look at the economic benefits, that's a pretty strong number compared to anything else.
Many people don't know that Gates and Fauci have been partners for decades, and together they have built a powerful global network including heads of state, health ministers, international health regulators, the World Health Organization, World Bank, World Economic Forum, and key leaders from the financial industry and even military officials. All in all, they fund 300,000 positions, and these doctors, hospital administrators, health officials, and research virologists are the foot soldiers in their war to support lucrative vaccines.
Did you hear that? 300,000 jobs these two men have under their thumb. Hospital administrators. This is what we were talking about in all of those videos that we posted about hospitals holding people hostage and do not resuscitate orders coming down from hospital administrators where nurses were in tears saying they're killing these patients. They're making us do these protocols against the family's wishes, and, you know, just tons of reports of something that sounds like, oh, that's impossible. That would never happen here in America. And we had talked about this exact thing. This is how they do it, systematically, taking over the larger hospitals through the hospital administrators, through the doctors, through the labs. They fund 300,000 jobs in our medical establishment. And Fauci isn't even spending his own money. He has basically an endless supply of our money. This is what I was talking about, them siphoning off of us everything that we've achieved as we built this nation as a people. They siphon off everything we can earn and produce. I mean, to the point that they've outspent our gross domestic product. We're like so far in debt, I mean, it's done. And that's what a parasite does.
It's great the U.S. government has been willing to fund vaccine manufacturers. Our foundation is partnered with them on that. That's something in my regular phone calls with Dr. Fauci, we update each other on, okay, how are we working with various companies? You know, which ones do we think we need to add to the mix there?
At the end of the day, these two men, through their financial stranglehold on the world, controlled the narrative around COVID-19 that led to mass vaccination and a giant payoff for all their partners such as Pfizer and Moderna.
And then this week we had this story just break about this monkey research facility that was funded by Gates and Fauci, again, falsifying all of this data. And keep this clip in the back of your mind for the second half of this video, because we're going to talk about our lifelong monkey narrative, that these emerging viruses, not the ones that were around when we were born into the world, these new ones that keep showing up, keep popping up, you know, they all come from these monkeys. That's the cover story. So now we know where they get the data to support these lies.
So a really interesting and remarkable story broke this week. Dr. Deepak Kaushal, who oversees the Texas Biomedical Research Institute's $40+ million Southwest Primate Research Center, which receives a bunch of federal funding and has a bunch of primates in their so-called care that they're experimenting on. Their director, Dr. Deepak Kaushal, was credibly accused of research misconduct by the U.S. Office of Research Integrity, which is part of the HHS. He's settled. This is huge. Prominent scientist who runs one of the biggest monkey laboratories in the United States was caught falsifying data. I think it's just the tip of the iceberg. This guy gets tons and tons of Gates funding. He puts in his bio that he's funded by the Gates Foundation. He also gets a colossal amount of NIH funding. You know, Fauci's agency. So this guy's getting money from Fauci's agency and Gates' foundation. So he got in trouble with the Office of Research Integrity, which is an office in the HHS, United States government. They say that a few years ago he faked research. He falsified, fabricated research. But what makes this story really interesting is this now discredited, now disgraced researcher was in charge of a very similar study as part of Pfizer's clinical trials and preclinical trials of their vaccine. He authored a paper and coordinated a lot of research. that was sponsored by Pfizer, where he claims to have seen great performance in the Pfizer vaccine when they challenged the injected monkeys.
Many people don't understand that the drug ads Big Pharma buys aren't to make you aware of their products. They fund the doctors to do that. But if they pay enormous sums of money to say CNN, then they can control what CNN has to say.
You're not going to bite the hand that feeds you. If you're getting, hundreds of thousands of dollars in drug ads, you're not going to be publishing the stories around harm, the stories about the corruption in the pharmaceutical industry. You're just not going to cover those stories. The journalists, well, they won't touch a story if it has to do with a product that one of their major advertisers is selling.
Good Morning America is brought to you by Pfizer. CBS Health Watch sponsored by Pfizer. Anderson Cooper 360 brought to you by Pfizer.
ABC News Nightline brought to you by Pfizer. Making a difference. Brought to you by Pfizer. CNN Tonight brought to you by Pfizer. Early Stars brought to you by Pfizer. Aaron Burnett Out Front brought to you by Pfizer. And now a CBS Sports Update brought to you by Pfizer. CBS This Morning sponsored by Pfizer. This Week with George Stephanopoulos is brought to you by Pfizer.
And when news anchors like Don Lemon and Chris Cuomo start talking down to their audience, people start tuning out.
So I think we have to stop coddling people when it comes to this and the vaccine, saying, oh, you can't shame them, you can't call them stupid, you can't call them silly. Yes, they are. The people who are not getting vaccines, who are believing the lies on the internet instead of science, it's time to start shaming them.
Okay, so you guys get the idea. We go over this all the time. We could nonstop broadcast 24/7 around the clock examples of them falsifying data and lying and, all of it. We know it. They're a bunch of shysters. They're con men. But real quick, before I start the final segment about these injections, this injection schedule we've been on our entire lives, whether they have ever worked. Is there any evidence that they have ever worked? We've been told, oh, it eradicated this and eradicated that and all of that. So I want to show you the real data. I think you'll be surprised when you see the real data in context and how easily they manipulated the data to make us think that these injections were actually vaccines. Not just this injection, the COVID one, but any of them. Were any of them ever vaccines? Or were they always gene therapy injections? Like all gene therapy injections, it's always an injection schedule, a series of injections. And if you look at every single one that they've told us is a vaccine, look at this. They don't call them boosters, but you got to get your first, second, and third dose, or first, second, third, and fourth dose, or a dose every year for the rest of your life. But before I tie into that segment, I want to finish up what I was talking about with Monsanto. Farming is what they're calling this pharmaceutical farm industry, like Bill Gates buying up all of the farmland because they want to put the vaccines in the plants. And not just vaccines, but other GMO components like we just talked about, and even nanotechnology. And that's the thing, the nanotechnologies in the GMO products and all the canned goods that all of these corporations in the military-industrial complex are using, they say just for preservatives. It just helps preserve this or it helps that. None of that is regulated. Look it up. There is zero nanotechnology regulation in the food supply. And they're like, it's probably fine. It'll keep your food fresh. Well, we don't know why they're putting it in the food supply, but they're putting it all over in the food supply. And surely we're far enough along in this that some people will begin to listen to us. Even though the mainstream media, they mock, General Flynn says they're going to try to put a vaccine in your salad dressing. Ha, 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 ha. They did. It's already happened. They've put it in the food supply. But it's not really a vaccine. It's a genetic engineering program. I mean, here's one. This is from 2004, where they created a vaccine in tobacco. And again, this is NIH.gov, so you can go look it up. It's 154-77091. This is 2004, when they created the vaccine in the tobacco plant. They said they were trying to cure an epidemic of diarrhea virus. A tobacco mosaic virus, TMV-based vector was utilized for the expression of a core neutralizing epitope of PEDV for the development of a plant-based vaccine. In this study, the coding sequence of a COE gene was optimized based on the modification of codon usage in tobacco plant genes and the removal of the mRNA destabilizing sequences. Blah, 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 blah. Therefore, this result indicates that the plant viral expression system with the synthetic gene is suitable to produce a large amount of antigen for the development of plant-based vaccine rapidly. And before some naysayer smarty pants out there wants to say, oh, it's talking about plant viruses, duh. No, it is specifically talking about a coronavirus vaccine. The porcine epidemic diarrhea virus is a coronavirus that affects swine. So basically a swine flu. But the point is that that was 2004 and that they had made these coronavirus vaccines in plants. And here's a whole host of more NIH.gov articles, plant-based vaccines, the way ahead. This is in 2020. Here's one from 2022. Plant-based vaccines, antigen design, diversity, and strategies. A plant-based COVID-19 vaccine could soon hit the market. Researchers at the Quebec-based biotechnology company GlaxoSmithKline have developed a plant-based vaccine for SARS-CoV-2, the virus that causes COVID-19. Yeah, right. And their recently reported interim findings from phase 2 clinical trials look promising. The vaccine uses a relative of the tobacco plant. Same thing that was going on in 2004. How convenient. And yet they mock us. They mock us when we say that they are putting this stuff in the food supply. But now they finally come out all these years later and admitted that the quote-unquote conspiracy theorists were right all along, that you can grow and eat your own vaccines. The University of California says the future of vaccines may look more like eating a salad than getting a shot in your arm. They just got a $500,000 grant. Because if they're successful with a new GMO food supply, the public could eat mRNA vaccines. Sounds yummy. So the audacity of the Huffington Post to, and all the mainstream media, to do this crap. Michael Flynn spreads bizarre conspiracy theory about vaccines and salad dressing. When he wasn't even saying what I'm saying. I'm saying, yeah, they are putting it in the food supply. That's what I'm saying. That's my opinion. But he didn't even say that. He just said in an interview off the cuff, somebody sent me this article this morning where they were talking about putting the vaccine into salad dressing or into the salads. So these journalists, and I use that term loosely, like Josephine Harvey, she's either incredibly ignorant, like very uneducated and incompetent at her job, or else she's doing this on purpose, that she is our enemy and she's trying to misguide people away from the truth. Okay, back to the regular GMO crops and Monsanto and all that. I wanted to play some more clips from the Coverup report, this a very old one from I think it's 2007. But again, there are these startling similarities, these threads that run through all of this, following this idea, this line of thought that we're on, that this thing is way bigger than what they're doing with these COVID injections. It's even way bigger than just vaccines. And we're sick and dying. It's so diabolical, that by giving us VAIDS, vaccine-acquired immune deficiency, or what used to just be called AIDS, turning off our T cells.
But what we're seeing in the laboratory after people get these shots, we're seeing a very concerning locked-in low profile of these important killer T cells that you want in your body. It's almost a reverse HIV. In HIV, you lose your helper T cells, your CD4 cells. In this virus post-vaccine, what we're seeing is a drop in your killer T cells, your CD8 cells. And what did CD8 cells do? They keep all other viruses in check. What am I seeing in the laboratory? I'm seeing an uptick of herpes family viruses. I'm seeing herpes, I'm seeing shingles, I'm seeing mono, I'm seeing a huge uptick in human papillomavirus in the cervical biopsies and the cervical pap smears in women. In addition to that, there's a little infectious bump the kids get called molluscum contagiosum. What do you need to keep that in check? You need CD8 killer T cells. I am seeing a 20 times increase in individuals over the age of 50 of this little bump and rash. That's innocuous, but what it tells me is the immune status of these individuals who have gotten the shot. We're literally weakening the immune system of these individuals. Now, most concerning of all is there's a pattern of these types of immune cells in the body that keep cancer in check. Well, since January 1, in the laboratory, I've seen a 20 times increase of endometrial cancers over what I see on an annual basis. A 20 times increase. I'm not exaggerating at all. Because I look at my numbers year over year. I'm like, gosh, I've never seen this many endometrial cancers before. I'm seeing invasive melanomas in younger patients. Normally we catch those early and they're thin melanomas. I'm seeing thick melanomas skyrocketing in the last month or two. I'm already seeing the early signals.
Genetically modifying us to turn off our T cells, it's so diabolical because then everybody's just like, oh, everybody's dying of natural causes. It's not one thing. People are dying of everything. Or they're dying of, blood clots and strokes and, other side effects of these genetic modification programs. But we were born into this. So we're just like, oh, cancer is always rampant. Heart failure, heart disease is always rampant. All of these autoimmune disorders, they've always been rampant. They haven't.
One of the first scientific tests of the effects of GM foods on mammals was conducted by Dr. Arpad Pusztai. Dr. Pusztai was commissioned by the Scottish office of the UK government to examine the effects of feeding rats with GM food for 100 days. The shocking results of that study indicated that the GM-fed rats had depleted immune systems, damaged internal organs, and stunted growth. These results were shocking, perhaps horrifying for those who saw them, and the backlash from those financially connected to the biotechnology industry was swift. Dr. Pusztai was quickly retired from his position, and despite independent peer review which has since vindicated his original research, he was at the time tarred and feathered for reporting on the results of his experiment with alarm. More shocking experimental evidence of the potential hazards of GM foods were presented by Dr. Irina Ermakova of Moscow to the Russian Academy of Sciences in 2005. Her study of feeding GM soy flour to female rats showed alarming results indeed. In her study, the female rats who had been fed the GM soy flour died at an alarming rate. 55.6% of those rats born to the females who were fed GM soy flour died during the experiment, whereas 6.8% of the control group died, meaning that the offspring of these GM-fed rats died at a rate almost 10 times that of the control group. These shocking experimental results show that there are significant scientific questions about the safety of genetically modifying our food crops. But let's take a step back for a moment to look at the scientific process by which organisms are crossed. Let's turn back to a clip from that documentary, The Future of Food, which explains the scientific process by which genes from one organism are inserted into another organism.
Genetic engineering is really a radical revolution in food production. It's really a cell invasion technology. People have heard they're taking a flounder gene and putting it in tomato, so the tomato can last in cold temperatures. But people don't ask, how does that flounder gene get in that tomato? How does it get in there? And what really happens is, the only way you can do it is to invade the cell of the tomato and deposit the flounder gene. Well, what's good at invading cells? Bacteria and viruses.
After 12 years of searching, Monsanto found a soil bacteria that is naturally immune to Roundup herbicide. Their goal was to genetically engineer DNA from these bacteria into various plants. They cut out a sequence of DNA that is resistant to Roundup. But if this DNA sequence alone is inserted into a corn plant, it will have no effect. So the next step involves E. coli bacteria. Gaps are created in the E. coli DNA, and when the two test tubes are mixed together, some of the E. coli DNA recombines with the Roundup-resistant bacteria. Then the technicians smuggle the engineered DNA into the cells of the corn plant they want to modify. Cells will naturally reject foreign DNA, so they developed a method using soil bacteria that causes tumors in plants. They use this bacteria to ferry the engineered DNA into the plant's nucleus. There are also 2 other methods used to get the engineered DNA through the cell wall. One uses a stream of electricity to create tiny holes in the plant cells so they become vulnerable to infiltration by foreign DNA. Another is the gene gun, which blasts particles of gold coated with engineered DNA into the plant cells. Each of these 3 methods needs a promoter gene that turns on the desired characteristics. The promoter gene is often extracted from the cauliflower mosaic virus.
This capacity of bacteria and viruses to invade mammals in different ways is what really has a lot of people edgy about biotechnology, because that's really what the tools are all about. In order to move genetic material from one organism to another that don't normally cross, you've got to sort of behave like bacteria and viruses and invade into the cells and become established, just like a virus must become established.
And they do one more thing. They attach to that an antibiotic marker system.
The antibiotic marker is a gene which is naturally resistant to a specific antibiotic, so later they can test whether the genetic cassette is being expressed.
The most cataclysmic force in the food system right now is the fact that the medical community is just terrified about the loss of antibiotics. No one really understands how using antibiotic marker genes in genetic engineering techniques might contribute to the problem. The biomedical community on a worldwide basis is absolutely focused on this problem now.
Since then, it's gone on to develop a wide array of chemicals which have become household names, some of the most infamous being Agent Orange, DDT, and aspartame. As its relation to DDT would denote, it has been heavily involved in the herbicide industry in the United States. The first commercially available Roundup Ready crop was Roundup Ready soybeans, which were released in 1996, followed by Roundup Ready corn in 1998. And since then, sorghum, canola, alfalfa, and cotton versions of the Roundup Ready crops have been made commercially available. By 2005, it was estimated that 87% of U.S. soybean fields were planted with the Roundup Ready soybeans. Thus, by the late 1990s and early 2000s, most of North America were eating genetically modified crops, and most people were unaware that they were doing so.
Okay, so now I want to play this clip from Dr. Leonard Horowitz. This is a very old lecture that he gave. He's much older now, but he's been fighting this since back during the Dr. Gallo era, who Bill Clinton pardoned on his way out of office. This lecture was back when his book Emerging Viruses, AIDS and Ebola first came out. I have been able to get a couple copies of this book in hardcover in the archive. Plus, I have the full collection of DVD lectures from Dr. Len Horowitz on multiple subjects, not just this. And then I have the thumb drives so that we can burn DVDs of videos like this that have been online. And I'm going to use several longer clips of this when we're talking about these emerging viruses and this entire hoax. The whole thing, top to bottom, has been a hoax. The entire vaccine topic has been a hoax, in my opinion. The viruses and the vaccines have all been a hoax. It has all been a cover story to socially engineer humans to take part in this injection schedule and to not question all of these illnesses that we are seeing pop up. But the clip I want to use right now, that I want to put back to back with the Monsanto clips, are all of these illnesses, because we're always seeing these stories. We're always getting the recalls because someone gets sick and they do a test. They finally test the food supply and they're like, oh, there's E. coli in the lettuce, or there's E. coli in the beef, or there's this or that causing illness in the food supply, in these plants that are coming from these specific places, and in these meats that are coming from very specific places. So that's what I want to talk about right now. We are always told the same story. Oh, it's somebody who was picking the vegetables and didn't wash their hands, or an employee in the meat processing plants, something like that, blaming it on the employees. But I want to show you that it's actually the exact opposite. The employees aren't infecting the food supply. The food supply is infecting the employees. We just saw in the Monsanto genetic engineering projects, they use incredibly dangerous bacteria and technologies in the plants to genetically engineer them. And not just bacteria, but then they make them antibiotic resistant by putting other genetic markers in there. So all of these years ago, Dr. Horowitz was way ahead of his time, and he caught on to that about the recombinant DNA and this genetic engineering of the crops, and that these fruits and vegetables that were being shipped in from South America in particular were making people sick.
You see, they're taking us out, and we don't even know it. In fact, the other day, the United States government and the Centers for Disease Control, in my opinion, committed a complete atrocity. An insult to intelligence. Unfortunately, there's little of that anymore. You might have heard the story of how contaminated fruit, strawberries and blueberries, allegedly came from Mexico containing hepatitis A viruses, and that the United States government then proceeded to make desserts and then ship them in 8 or 9 states. 8 or 9,000 children in the United States then developed hepatitis A. And who did they blame? Not so much the Mexicans. They gave the Mexicans a little slap on the wrist. Oh, it must be those dirty Mexicans. No racist propaganda to continue to divide and conquer the flock. What did they blame? They blamed American parents, particularly mothers, for not getting their children vaccinated. Yes, in every newspaper around the country it was used, it was twisted and distorted. Instead of in every other industry, if you have a company that puts out a contaminated product, what happens to that company? They take the product off the shelves and they have congressional hearings and legislative inquiries, and they then make sure that they have high standards of disinfection, sterilization, quality, but not in this case. The United States government didn't do that. They blamed you parents out there for not getting your children vaccinated. Talk about absolute, consistent Machiavellian and Hegelian propaganda. Create a problem, then create the solution. So that when I was approached by this Pentagon official and many other people who were equally concerned about the United States military being taken out for accomplishing a New World Order agenda, a super government, you see, their concern was because the United States Department of Defense, the Pentagon, was preparing to inoculate 1.2 million military personnel and their families with a new anthrax vaccine, that their concern was that they could literally take out 37% of the United States military with one injection. Now, my mother died a couple years ago of a flu vaccine, most plausibly a flu vaccine, induced disease called Guillain-Barré, or what they call the French polio, which people who have studied now vaccine contamination risk issues understand that Guillain-Barré is one of the most common vaccine-related injuries. And you see, I can't help but think that my mother, Jewish, who escaped these people in 1939 by literally getting on the last boat that made it out, was killed by the same people. Because you think that the agenda's ever ceased? George Bush, during his presidential election, was funded by the Nazis and their heirs. Largely, a great portion of his political campaign funds came directly from the Nazis or their heirs that they got out during Project Paperclip. You see, they're taking us out, and we don't even know it. Well, isn't that neat? You think about it. What did they tell those millions of people that they marshaled into the gas chambers? And they went. They went without rioting, without putting up a fuss. They told them that this was for public health. This is for your own health. This is for, quote, disinfection.
In fact, that's exactly what China, communist China, is still telling their residents as they walk around spraying them with these toxic chemicals in the exact areas where these quote-unquote COVID outbreaks happen. They tell them, oh no, this is just the disinfectant. And everybody's like, this is ridiculous. They're mocking them in their suits and, you know, that doesn't make any sense. You guys don't know science. That's just such silly state TV propaganda. Is it all silliness? Or are they doing the same exact thing that the Nazis did in World War II? And they are telling these people that they are disinfecting them for their health and they are poisoning them. And then they're saying it's COVID. And they're doing it to us too. It's just we're a little more high tech. They're spraying chemtrails over us and telling us it's COVID. And they even target specific areas. Remember that video I put up, War Report, Rob Skiba and Russ Dizdar are dead and Steve Quayle's on oxygen. And that was the same time that Alex Jones and his whole family got hit. And I don't remember was that Delta or Omicron? I don't remember, but it was these specific areas over Florida and Texas because they had refused to go along with the federal mandates and the masks and everything. So they sprayed them or put it in the food supply, the water supply. I talked about a lot of different ways that they were poisoning people. Remember back during the lockdowns in 2021 when the Florida city's water supply was hacked and the hacker tried to poison the water supply? The guy just happened to be at his desk and see his cursor moving around. Like, have you guys ever used the remote help from, like, say, your Dell service, your Dell computer or something, and you can go into the chat and you can ask them to remotely access your computer, a technician, and fix it, and you sit there while it's really weird. You give them permission to take over your computer remotely, and they start moving your cursor around and opening stuff in your computer and going in and fixing it remotely. Well, that's essentially what this guy saw this hacker doing. He was at his desk and he saw his cursor opening up tabs and changing the chemical levels. This was sodium hydroxide levels in the water supply so that it would start killing people. Around 8 a.m. on Friday morning, an employee of the water treatment plant in the 15,000-person city of Oldsmar, Florida, noticed that his mouse cursor was moving strangely on his computer screen out of his control. Initially, he wasn't concerned. The plant used the remote access software TeamViewer to allow staff to share screens and troubleshoot IT issues, and his boss often connected to his computer to monitor the facility's systems. But a few hours later, police say the plant operator noticed his mouse moving out of his control again. This time, there would be no illusion of benign monitoring from a supervisor or IT person. The cursor began clicking through the water treatment plant's controls. Within seconds, the intruder was attempting to change the water supply's levels of sodium hydroxide, also known as lye, or caustic soda, moving the setting from 100 parts per million to 11,100 parts per million. In low concentrations, the corrosive chemical regulates the pH balance of potable water. At high levels, it severely damages any human tissue it touches. So again, all of those mockers that, came down on Dr. Ardis like a pack of wolves has said, oh, that's so silly to even in the midst of all these vaccines and what we're so smartly talking about, that anyone would suggest that they would also use the water supply. Well, your arrogance is showing, your flesh is showing, you guys. You might want to tuck that in, because the water supply and the food supply absolutely are being used in conjunction with the virus narrative in this big picture hoax. Just because his research on these venom peptides aren't the entire big picture doesn't mean that they aren't a very important, valuable piece of this puzzle. And I hope to have time eventually to do an entire full version video just on that. But I have mentioned tidbits about the subject throughout, like back in 2021 in the War Report video. We had talked about the assassination attempts on these Russian YouTubers who mock Vladimir Putin, specifically Alexei Navalny, because he was poisoned with the VX nerve agent. Russia's VX nerve agent that they've used throughout past wars, the Novichok nerve agent to be specific. And he was hospitalized, of course, they said, as COVID or flu-like symptoms, and he couldn't get any help. He had to leave the country. And when he was hospitalized outside the country, then they treated him and he did survive. They had put the VX nerve agent in his clothing, in his underwear. And when he put them on, because it's a skin contact poison, he fell deathly ill. And that word VX in VX nerve agents stands for Venom X. But the point is, the things that the Lord wants to reveal to us are so big that we've got to keep an open mind. We cannot turn on each other. We have to unify all of the puzzle pieces that he gives each one of us. This thing is so big, you guys. We have been lied to on such a grand scale. We were born into a lie on almost every front. And we're never going to completely wake up unless we can come together and listen to one another. We don't do the cancel culture. That's what they do. We don't do the censorship. That's what they do. We don't attack one another. We're one family. And God placed all of these puzzle pieces. He sprinkled them throughout in all of us so that we would come together. You guys know my motto from my book, that God told me the move of God in the earth is exactly equivalent to the size of the unity in the body of Christ. I don't care if you have the greatest microscopy images or whatever God's entrusted you with, that you're not the only one in the body. And all of these things are going on simultaneously. The CIA and the communist KGB agents like Vladimir Putin, they have used these venom toxins as weapons forever. I mean, it's all well documented. And our enemies use the food supply and the water supply in conjunction with all of these other ways, all of these other things. None of these tactics are mutually exclusive, including one about the polio outbreak in the United States of America. Remember these pictures when we get to the footage about the polio outbreak in the United States of America and how they were spraying exactly like this, DDT, all over the children and the food and everything. It looked exactly like these pictures. And they told us that that set of symptoms was polio. And what company created those chemicals, the DDT that was sprayed during the polio outbreak? Monsanto. Same people. Same game. Okay, but back to what Dr. Horowitz was saying about these fruits and vegetables that were coming out of this area in Brazil or in South America that were contaminated, that were making people sick. Well, we know, right, that the Nazis, right here, 12,000 Nazis, we have the list, the names, many of them were rounded up. Adolf Eichmann, he was kidnapped by Israeli agents in 1960 and taken back to Jerusalem and hanged. So this isn't a conspiracy theory that these people actually went to South America, thousands, tens of thousands of these Nazis, and settled there and continued the work. In fact, here's a travel agent brochure talking about culture trips and how southern Brazil became known as Little Germany because of their farming communities. That going back even before World War II, You know, we've traced this Aryan culture, this Aryan race, back to the Rhine River area and all of that, going well back into the 1700s and before. So this started before World War II, that they started moving Germans into parts of southern Brazil and all through South America, setting up German towns. We have Germantown here, several hours away, a couple hours away from here, we have a Germantown. But certainly after World War II, all of these tens of thousands of Nazis escaped then into Brazil and Argentina and all throughout South America into these farming communities that were already established and blended in, changed their names and blended in. I'll put these links so you can read up on it if you don't know about the enormous German presence in South America. But it's pretty common knowledge about the Nazis in Argentina and all of that now. And then Sidney Powell brought to light their presence all throughout Venezuela and how they had, I mean, they've taken over all of South America. It's all dictatorships down there. I mean, that's why we have these convoys coming up from that area into the United States. I mean, it's a mixed bag. These people are literally fleeing these horrific dictatorships that have taken over their nations, but mixed in there are all of these terrorists, literal terrorist sleeper cells that are coming up from those same areas that have been trained by these same people we're talking about right now. And like we talked about in the Titan Point series, Sidney Powell had exposed how in Venezuela it was those ruling dictatorships who financed the Dominion voting fraud software, that these Nazi-run areas down there in South America, that they had financed this software that was then used and sold to the Dominion company that was working with George Soros so that they could remotely access elections all around the world, not just the United States election, and that they could change votes at their leisure and bounce it through a VPN, an encrypted, like high-tech, way higher than our VPNs, an encrypted VPN system. They could bounce it off a satellite system run through Italy that would hide the location of the people who were actually there changing the votes. And that all came from Venezuela. And the beta tests on that technology were originally run when they took over these nations, the governments, when they installed their tyrannical dictatorships over these nations in South America. So here's Venezuela. Here's Brazil, where the Germans took over all the farming land. Of course, here's Argentina. We know that they escaped into Argentina. Then here's Guyana. This is where the CIA projects were set up. You know, Jim Jones' Guyana cult was done there, not just by the CIA, but on CIA land. It was literally land that was owned by the CIA. And that's a topic that I could do a whole other, 4-hour video on. But you can still look it up. I know it's getting increasingly difficult to find any information on the internet, that it's been completely scrubbed. It's just almost impossible to do research on the internet. But you can still find some of these conspiracy blogs and stuff that will give you the actual data and the documents. This is all provable. They have the documents. This was an abandoned CIA base, a CIA base that he then bought, miraculously got this great deal on to set up his cult there. You should be able to note the dates as we go through their takeover of our food supply, that all of this started right after World War II. And all throughout the 1950s, we've already done series on the CIA distributing LSD and all of these chemical neural implants that were temporary. Your body flushes them out, but these were the experiments on these neural implants, these chemical neural implants that were already linking people into this AI virtual reality where they would see these machine elves and machine art and all this geometric stuff, all the stuff that they are openly showing us now with Google Deep Dream AI, these mathematically created images. Because now the technocracy is open about the synthetic humans and linking our brains into the AI singularity, the Internet of Things, and all of this. So So now they show us that this is AI generated. But back 70 years ago, a lot of people didn't know they were going into the AI singularity. A lot of them really thought the singularity, the machine, was God. So when we talk about Jim Jones moving that experimental group out into offshore, out of the United States, where they could do these drug experiments on them, they were starving to death out there in the jungle, but they had an endless supply of all of these drugs, just a litany of drugs that they were administering to these people and taking themselves. And Jim Jones had an inner circle of medical professionals, doctors and nurses, who were not only receiving these shipments of drugs, but then administering them to everybody, including the drugs that he used to kill them all. Anyway, so that's Guyana. That's what's been going on all through here. This is just the cabal. So we have the Nazis in Argentina and Brazil, and then linked to the CIA in Guyana, and then the dictatorships in Venezuela with the voting machines, and then they hop from the island. Here's Haiti. This is where the human trafficking hub, see how it's directly in between the U.S. and South America. So this is where they do the hops with the human trafficking through Haiti. Most of you know about the Clintons in Haiti and the child trafficking and all of that. And then this is Cuba, which is also communist run. And this is the exact Red Dawn scenario, right? So they had South America, China, and Russia attacking the United States in the original. I think they changed it to like North Korea or something in the remake. But anyway, this is Cuba, and we all know about the JFK Cuban Missile Crisis before they assassinated him, that Russia had, this was their staging area where they were putting their nuclear missiles close enough, because they didn't have intercontinental ballistic missiles back then. So in the 60s, they were using Cuba here as a staging area so that they could launch their nuclear missiles at the United States from Cuba. So here are just some of the recon photos of what they detected back then, where they were setting up camps in these forested areas, and they were setting up the factories to produce the ammunitions and stuff that they would need. And we've had tons and tons of eyewitnesses in Mexico who have stumbled across these staging areas with thousands of tanks, thousands of military tanks and equipment just across the U.S. border in Mexico, staged, hidden back in these forest areas and different things. Most of those have been scrubbed. I'm sure you guys have seen them over the decades, but most of them have been scrubbed now. I can't find this gentleman's video, but I did find Dabu777's commentary on it. So he, I guess, was removed from YouTube. But I did find a couple of minutes commentary just to remind you guys. This happened during the caravans in 2018. He was out there to cover the caravans, and this is what he saw.
For what it's worth, I want to make mention what this guy is saying, because there could be some validity to a lot of what he's saying. Now, I have no way of proving or disproving anything that this guy is saying in his statements, but the information, I believe, needs to be shared so people can use discernment and decide for themselves. And what this man is stating as he's sitting in traffic in Mexico is that this whole caravan has made its way from all these countries into Mexico City. They took over a stadium. They demanded that they get whatever that they want. They are stopping cars on the highway. Anyone that's by themselves driving a car, they stop it, they force them out, and they leave them stranded on the side of the road as they steal their cars. He says they've gathered evidence showing proof that companies that are supported by George Soros are in those countries specifically getting these people to do this, to make this move. Now, he also says that as normal people in Mexico are going by trying to take pictures of the migrants, something odd is happening. Any other migrant that has ever passed through the country that they've taken pictures of, they've never stopped them and demand that they delete it. Well, it seems that this caravan is stopping cars, is stealing the cell phones, and demanding that people delete the images of them. Why would they do that? This is of one of the biggest orchestrations we've seen to date, and it's headed toward our border, as our troops sit down there in tent cities with no electric. And they want to point the finger at the militia down there and say that they could cause more problems than these people that are headed toward the border. So now this man says one of his associates stopped at a bordering area coming up through Central America into Mexico. And when he did, he stopped to take a leak on the side of the road. He looked into the jungle and he's seen thousands and thousands and thousands of tanks with red stars on them. He said he's not sure if they're North Korean, if they're Russian, or if they're Chinese. But he says they're there. That's not surprising to me. It may be to some. But what he goes on to say is even more disturbing. Vladimir Putin, Communist Russia, have struck up deals where they're now building inside of Mexico. They're building tanks, armored vehicles, and they're giving 10% of everything that they build to the Mexican military. And they're also doing all this tax-free. So Russia doesn't have to send a boatload of military across the ocean. They're building it in Mexico per contracts that they've set up with the president. And to show you what's happened with Mexico, this man says that the country's been sold out to the left. Leftist side is his statement. He also goes on to say that the dictator Maduro from Venezuela is about to show up in Mexico to congratulate the new president of Mexico on his victory. A dictator.
Now, 4 years ago, when that was taped, I'm sure the brainwashed masses thought that, that's absurd. That'll never happen. Not to the USA. We're so strong. And they were building the border wall and trying to curtail it and all of that. But now I think it's pretty obvious to everybody that our regime, the Biden regime, is complicit in this. They have stopped all obstacles to the southern border invasion. In fact, they are busing them in. They're separating the women and children out and busing the military-aged men into sleeper cell cities all across the United States. If you do not know what I'm talking about, this video right here on the screen that I put up in March of 2022, ambush, sleeper cells take over the military bases, invasion of the U.S., and the southern border crisis. In there, I talk about my dad and brother taped it all the way down to our local level. They were busing these were all men of military age, young, strong men. There were no women or children amongst these immigrants. There were no elderly. These men were being bused. They were let off the bus into a hotel here locally, 10 miles away or so. And they were all Middle Eastern men and South American men. So the invasion is on. It's already underway. This isn't something that's going to happen. This has happened. The ambush hasn't happened. This is anybody who knows anything about war. I was in the Marine Corps. I don't have a lot of knowledge, but I have enough to know and understand what I am looking at. That there are forward operations before the invasion where you start moving the equipment in, you start positioning the troops, you start cutting off the supply lines to the people you're going to attack, all of these type of forward operations, which is where we are at right now. Even when there were plenty of supplies, they wouldn't let them port and unload them. This video that I have here on the screen, martial law, cargo ships, supply lines, and staff shortages, also I talk about in there that the same way with the convoys, bringing in a physical, boots on the ground, invasion force from the Middle East and South America, I saw many years ago in a vision that on the East Coast in the port cities, that there was another simultaneous invasion during the ambush that were coming out of these cargo containers. They literally had hundreds of thousands of people sitting off the coastline in these cargo containers. And because they weren't Navy ships sitting off the coast of the United States of America, nobody thought anything about it. They were cargo ships. Their invasion forces were in the cargo ship, which they have now socially engineered us to think is totally normal, that we have all these ships surrounding the United States of America. So while they are orchestrating this disruption in imports and bringing supplies into our port cities from the outside in, on the inside here in the United States, They are burning down all of our food manufacturing plants, all of the ones that aren't bowing a knee to them, the ones that they don't own, so that they can centralize and completely control our food supply. Just this week again, we have fire erupts at Pendleton, Oregon flour mill, the latest in a long line of food processing facility fires. Here are some of the images with the different reports. Flour mill likely a, quote, total loss from the fire. Farmers and customers scramble to make new plans after flour mill fire. While simultaneously on another front of the war, on the biological warfare front, they are burning down all of the pharmaceutical production companies and murdering the owners and scientists who produce these pharmaceuticals that we need to fight the biological attack on our people, including the largest one in the world, which was in Taiwan. And now we know that China is set to invade Taiwan. But when that explosion took out the hydroxychloroquine factory there in Taiwan, at the same time, they took out the one in Mexico and the one here in Illinois, even 2 steps down the supply chain. So not just the factories making the actual drugs that we need to treat this biological warfare, but then the chemical plants that produce the component chemicals that supply the pharmaceutical companies that make these drugs. So here in Illinois, in Granite City and Rockton, Illinois, they took out our chemical plants as well. We covered that last summer, so we are well into the forward staging. And they do the same thing with our herds of livestock. So there's always, right, isn't there always, there's always a bird flu outbreak, there's always a swine flu outbreak where they are destroying constantly. Every month they are destroying the turkeys, the chickens, the cattle. They're just exterminating them and pushing them into mass graves within our country so that we can't produce our own meat. Which brings us back to Brazil, the billionaire Batista brothers, which are the sole owners of JBS meat processing, which now is the largest in the world, and we get most of our meat from these corrupt individuals. Over $50 billion a year in revenues just from them shipping meat. These guys have been arrested and in all kinds of trouble. They're super corrupt, but they still make $50 billion a year off of taking over our meat industry. So again, Brazil, we're back to South America, Brazil. Here is their official website. JBS is the biggest exporter in Argentina's meatpacking industry. And they have systematically taken over the entire world's meat supply while they are going nation to nation and closing down everything that is not centralized. So here we go. This is Wikipedia. JBS SA is a Brazilian company that is the largest meat processing company in the world. They process beef, chicken, and pork and sell byproducts. Starting in 1953 up to the turn of the millennium in the year 2000, they were taking all over South America. Then in 2007 to 2010, they acquired most of our largest companies. These are the ones that will not be burned down. You know, the ones that BlackRock and Vanguard are financing through the stock markets. So in the U.S., they took over Swift & Company, Smithfield Foods, Pilgrim's Pride. It's a sad day, but you can't even get an American Coney Island hot dog anymore. They even bought out Nathan's Hot Dogs. 2011 to 2016, of course, Canada, Mexico, Sara Lee Corporation, Tyson Foods, Cargill, Hillshire, Brooks. And then you can go down and you can see all of their bribery investigations and arrests. And, you know, they had to sell like a $50 million mansion to pay some of their legal bills and that sort of thing. Now, you'll notice this New York Post headline about JBS, the Batista brothers. It says, corrupt billionaire brothers' meat plants are riddled with coronavirus. So I'm sure you guys remember about these outbreaks of these COVID symptoms in the meatpacking plants. And most of them were coming from these guys' Brazilian meats. The world's largest meat processing giant was forced to shut down some of its U.S. plants. More than 100 of its workers tested positive for COVID-19 just last week. Now again, this is what I'm talking about, them always telling us the inversion, the exact opposite of the truth. That these workers, these employees did not bring COVID-19 into their meat processing plants. All of these workers were getting infected from these meat processing plants. Now remember last year when we put up the Magnet Gate video showing the injections, and at the injection sites, magnets were sticking to people because of this nanotechnology they were injecting into everybody. Well, at the same time, we showed all of these pictures in a series of videos, in a couple different videos, that it was also sticking to the meat. And people were saying, well, it can't be the injections because it's also sticking to other meat. Well, yeah, it is. It's the same technology. They put it in our food supply. It was in that same series of videos that we actually started talking about them putting the same technologies in the pills, especially in South America and in Mexico. There were tons of people showing over-the-counter medications that they were testing, and they found it in every single one. Well, not every single one, but you know what I mean. That this technology, what I'm saying here in this video, that they have put this stuff in the over-the-counter medications as well as through the pharmaceutical prescriptions, in the injections, in the food supply, everywhere. This is endgame. You're not going to get out of this by passing one bill in the United States Congress or something. This is endgame. We're here, folks. Here's one for constipation. And notice that it says that the company says it contains plant extracts. This is what we were talking about with the farming. They've put it in the plants. It doesn't even have to. The people at the manufacturing plants making the over-the-counter pills, it might not even be put in at that level. It can be put in the plants that they then process to make the pills. I'm sorry to have to talk about it, but we need to know. We are at war. The war is raging all around us. And a lot of people are not preparing. They're not even aware that we are under attack, that we are right smack dab in the middle of World War III. I would say, here's some clips I want to show you about them finishing up, taking out our meat supplies. With the weather weapons, the weather warfare, they're hitting the droughts in our bread baskets, and not just our literal ability to make bread by trying to cut off our wheat supply through this Ukraine-Russia narrative while simultaneously burning down our flour processing mills. They have hit our bread baskets, our ranchers, with droughts so that they cannot provide for their cattle. And of course, with inflation and everything, they can't afford to feed their cattle. Fertilizer shortages and the diesel price increases, they can't even afford to grow their own food for their cattle. They are literally getting rid of their cattle. I know even here locally, we haven't had terrible weather. We've had summer, all summer. It's been 100 degrees, 110 degrees. So it's been a really hot one. But a lot of our smaller farmers who keep, say, 24 head of cattle, they've pared down to, I know over there by Hinks, they only had 4 in their pasture now. And they always have a few dozen. Even further north here in North America, up in Manitoba, same thing.
Dry, no rain, grasshoppers. It's been terrible.
That's how most farmers here describe 2021. Fields are barely sprouting anything. It's what brought Tom Clement here today. He's getting rid of a third of his livestock. There's just not enough pasture or hay to feed them.
Heartbreaking, really.
This is the third emergency sell-off at the Ashern Auction Mart since July, and summer sales like this are unprecedented. Auctioneer Buddy Bergner says there's no alternative.
People have to get rid of cattle because there's nothing for them to eat and you can't let them starve.
From morning to night, truck after truck arrive with cattle, more than 1,000 in total. Normally, calves wouldn't sell until later in the fall once they're weaned and bulked up for slaughter. Some generational family farms are selling off entire herds.
There's people crying in the stands when their animals sell. There's people that are upset. You get the whole spectrum of emotions when it's a situation like this.
West Interlake Reeve Arthur Jonassen is a cattle rancher himself and knows what's at stake.
These cows that are going through here now today, you'll see later on, were probably purchased at $2,000 a piece, and these guys are going to be lucky to get $1,000 for those cows.
It's all part of a super intricate plan that trickles down the entire supply chain, and they have us surrounded. These people have no choice but to get rid of their cattle. They cannot provide meat for us. This has opened up a small opportunity, though, for local small farmers in rural sanctuary city safe haven areas that we still do have greenery and stuff that you can take in, like we did it when I was a kid, a sow and a cow. That's how we ate. We hunted, Dad hunted deer and rabbit, and they put it on the table. I remember Dad going out. There were times during the Jimmy Carter era when times were tough and there was no gas. And I remember Dad going out in the snow, like knee-deep snow, rabbit hunting, and bringing us home 2 rabbits. And Mom cleaned them and we ate them for supper. A family of 5 ate. But most of the time we did pretty good. Mom and Dad both worked their butts off, at the railroad and in the factories. And, they worked hard their whole lives. So most of the time we were, middle class. And we had a sow and a cow. And we would raise just what we could fit on our 5 acres and put it in the freezer. And Mom canned the vegetables. We didn't get cans of tomatoes from Walmart. We got jars of tomatoes out of our cupboard that Mom had canned from the garden. And, beans and potatoes and whatever else that we grew. We had a little shed with some laying hens with chickens, and, we survived. And I praise God for that, because these younger generations who think that food comes from McDonald's and they don't know how to survive, they're going to be starving. And they will go directly to the mark of the beast to get their welfare or whatever if we are not there to intercept them. Please, you guys, please. This is coming. We are like 2 steps away. I would say the only thing left before the ambush as far as the forward operations would be the famine and the Civil War to weaken us to the point, and that should put us about the point 2 years in, 3 years in, from the bioweapons injections to where we will have mass death. We're already at 40% increased all-cause mortality. So we're going to have our young people. They've done it to our young people. They're the ones, our young, strong, while they're shipping in their military-aged, young, strong militants to take over our country. They've injected our young, strong generation with this bioweapon. And they can't even jog up my driveway without having a freaking heart attack from myocarditis. Our young, strong, athletic, they've already been injected with the bioweapon. This thing is just waiting to happen. I'm begging you, and it's humbling and humiliating that we can't get more than 200 people. And oh, praise God, thank you guys. Some of you have made, large donations. I can't thank you enough. I just can't. But it takes more than 200 of us. We're not going to be able to provide for all of these people who don't know how to be self-sufficient. And I can do a lot. I know how to do some stuff. And Deb's been canning. People have been working. We're networking. We're trying. But I can't do it. I'm just a single mom from Illinois. I have to have the resources to set up this safe haven. And I'm asking, there's got to be some more of you out there who are with us, who can see the value in what I'm doing right now, even just sitting in this chair broadcasting. If you are out there, brothers, sisters, if you are out there, This is the clarion call. I'm asking you, please take this seriously. We're getting very close. I would be surprised if we have more than 2 years before we need to be completely ready and stocked. And if we don't stock now, there isn't going to be a supply chain. We're not going to be able to get supplies, or we're not going to be able to afford them, or we won't have any sort of currency besides barter because we're not going to take the mark of the beast or get the vaccine passports or anything to even go into stores to get the supplies. It's now or never. Are you out there? Is there anybody else out there? Because the people of our country are going to need help. And I want to stretch as far as humanly possible to help as many as humanly possible. And if nobody else comes to join efforts and they don't see any value in what I do, then I'm still going to serve the Lord. I'll be sitting out here like that little old lady in the Stand movie where the refugees come through, you know, and she helps them on their way. I'll be here one way or the other. But I would like to do something big for God because He is worthy. And I love our brothers and sisters who are out there, and I hope you do too. Okay, I'm done. That's my fundraising spiel. Sorry about that. I'm very passionate about this project and about my service to the Lord. So anyway, back to this meat thing. So yeah, the Brazilians have taken over the entire meat industry. And what's left here in America, they are snuffing out with these weather weapons. And I know there is a whole host of control mechanisms that they use this global warming hoax to implement, but this is one of them to cover up this weather warfare that they are using. They are targeting specific areas so that they can take over the food supply. And with all of the awakening that's going on, you know, people will talk about a lot of this stuff openly now. They'll talk about election rigging. They'll talk about this stuff, but it's still one of the sort of taboo things among the farming community to admit that weather warfare exists. But if we are going to be effective at fighting this war, then we have to be educated. We have to know that things like cutting off the fertilizer, that's not some accidental byproduct of what's going on in the Ukraine and the sanctions. And no, of course it's not. They're not just doing away with the little guy. They're collapsing our nation. They're preparing for the invasion. They're going to weaken us. So our regime here in the United States passing these sanctions, they're not doing that because they care about the Ukrainian people. Are you kidding me? They're doing that because they're in cahoots with this cabal, and they are cutting us off. They're cutting off our homeland food supply. So it doesn't really matter if you think that the Biden regime is really against Putin and that regime, and they're trying to pass sanctions on them because there's some sort of internal mafia war between the mob families. Or if you think that it's all theater and there really isn't any battle, the only people paying the price are the regular folks there that are caught in the middle of this theatrical presentation. If you believe that Russia and the Biden administration is just Hegelian dialectic and they're really working together, and this is all just the theater that they put on for us, so we will accept them not allowing us to use fertilizer anymore and things like that. Either way, it benefits our enemies, and it is crushing our homegrown farmers. So either they are working together, whoever puppets this thing we call the Biden regime and Vladimir Putin's regime, either they are working together to accomplish this, to prepare for the imminent invasion of the United States of America, or else Putin is some sort of mastermind and he's just duping whoever is in control of this thing we call the Biden regime, and he's duped them into the sanctions. Presently, I lean more toward, 80% of it is theater, because we know what the Clintons did, Hillary Clinton with the Uranium One deal with Russia and her secret servers and all of that. So to me, that made it crystal clear that these people, the Bidens, the Clintons, the leftist regime, is in bed with Russia. They're in bed with Russia. They have supplied them for this coming war. So that would mean that the most of this is just Hegelian dialectic theater. You know, it's the Republican-Democrat thing on a world stage. And they've made Russia the enemy. Russia, 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 the Russian collusion and Russian bots. And that would mean that all of that was Hegelian dialectics, so that they set up who was going to play the enemy and who was going to play the good guy. It has worked. It's worked. The people of God are so focused on politics. I don't know. I don't know how. I don't want to hurt anybody's feelings, but I love you enough to tell you the truth. That Vladimir Putin he's not our friend. He is in bed with the same regime that's running the Biden regime, China. He's in bed with China, and China owns Biden. And the majority of this is theater. The pain and suffering on the ground is real, but the stuff at the higher up level, it's just Hegelian dialectic. Okay, so while we're on the subject of everybody being in bed with China, I want to finish up with what I started with, this lifelong injection program, this lifelong genetic engineering program that we were born into, and how on earth could it be possible to convince an entire population that viruses exist and that we have this need for constant injections. I mean, there must be some evidence, right, that vaccines ever worked, that they ever had any effect on humanity at all, besides the negative effects, the side effects of being genetically engineered. So let's start out with this spraying that we saw in China and the spraying of Monsanto's DDT product that we saw when we were told there was a polio outbreak. And I think you'll see the similarities not only there, but the similarities in all of this whole COVID narrative, that there's a set of symptoms. A lot of people don't realize that when there was a polio outbreak, and in the beginning when this stuff started, they didn't even try to say they had isolated anything or anything like that. Just people started going into the doctor and they had a set of symptoms, and that was how they diagnosed it. If you are showing these symptoms, it's because you have polio. It was that simple. It was really very simple. So they didn't even have to prove to the masses that there was a virus. They just told them there was. Because if you're having these symptoms, that's what you have. And look around, since so many other people have been poisoned too, so many other people have the same set of symptoms, then the only way to solve this is to get a polio injection. We need to start an injection schedule. And look, all of your celebrities, they're getting their polio shots. Look, Elvis Presley did it. He's the king, right? He's got how many zillions of followers? If he did it, then you should probably do it. It must be true if you see it on the television. And in my opinion, allegedly, that's exactly what I believe they're doing with COVID. Except now they've added a couple of steps, like they'll back it up with a PCR test that gives 80% false positives, or, something to add a little bit more validity to the hoax. I'm only going to play a few minutes clip here from the author of Dissolving Illusions, Disease, Vaccines, and the Forgotten History. And honestly, it really pains me to cut it down this short because the entire presentation is pertinent to everything we've been talking about here. And some of the clips that I had in the outline for this video probably aren't going to make it in, like probably the rest of Dr. Leonard Horowitz, because that's another 20 minutes just by itself. But I had known that I wanted to show you guys the entire Dr. Susan Humphreys presentation. So I had put it up in this video, Immortality, Glowing Veins, and the Polio Outbreak. I had put the entire video at the end of this 2-hour presentation. So I would encourage you, if you haven't seen that you would go back and watch all of it, because it is pertinent to everything we're talking about here today.
This here is a pie chart that I made up to show the Center for Disease Control and Prevention estimation of morbidity and mortality after infection with polio virus. Okay? They say that approximately 95% of persons infected with polio virus will have no symptoms. About 4 to 8% of infected persons have minor symptoms such as fever, fatigue, nausea, headache, flu-like symptoms, stiffness of the neck and back, and pain in the limbs, which often resolve completely. And that represents this yellow portion right here. I think probably everybody in this room has had that syndrome, haven't we? Fewer than 1% of polio cases result in permanent paralysis of the limbs, usually the legs. And of those paralyzed, 5 to 10% die when the paralysis strikes the respiratory muscles.